All right, it's 3 o'clock, so I'll call the meeting of the Kane County CARES Act Allocation Committee to order. I ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Hanson. Here. Kenyon. Froz. Sanchez.
Here.
Surges.
Yep.
Thomas. Here. Okay, no quorum.
All right, we have a quorum. First item of business is approval of the minutes from the July 13th and July 20th meetings. I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes. Moved by Mr. Kenyon, second by Mr. Sanchez. Any additions or corrections or comments to the minutes? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Oh,
Roll call.
I'm sorry, roll call. We'll do a roll call because of the setup we have here, please.
Hanson.
Yes.
Kenyon.
Yes.
Sanchez.
Yes.
Surges. Thomas. O'Shea.
Yes, and we'll show Mr. Froz is here as well. Welcome, Mr. Froz. All right, public comment. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to address the committee this afternoon? We had one person signed up to speak.
Jackson.
Joe Jackson from
House.
Hesed House. Is Mr. Jackson here? Good afternoon. Welcome. Thank you for coming this afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you. My name is Joe Jackson. I'm the managing director at Hesed House. For those who aren't familiar, Hesed House is the second largest homeless shelter in the state of Illinois and the largest in Kane County. We've been in existence for 37 years, and over that time, we've ended homelessness for thousands upon thousands of individuals and families, and have trained countless other organizations across the country to operate shelters and to do the same. That all sounds hunky-dory, so why am I here? Well, unfortunately, COVID-19 has crippled Hesed House's ability to serve the most vulnerable residents in the greater Aurora community. In response to the pandemic and the need for greater social distancing that came with it, the Kane County Health Department, the Kane County Office of Community Reinvestment, the Kane County State's Attorney's Office, the City of Aurora Building Services Division, and the City of Aurora Fire Department have assessed that Hesed House's main shelter building at 659 South River Street is no longer a viable option to serve the, on average, 250 men, women, and children that stay with us on a nightly basis. The building can house, per a joint letter from those organizations, a maximum of 115 individuals. Now, to get us through the summer, we've received permission to temporarily house up to 137 homeless individuals in a makeshift shelter space we've created in our 680 South River Street warehouse building. This building is directly across the street from our 659 main building. It's an old rubber manufacturing plant that was built in the 50s. As it stands today, it is far from equipped to provide long-term shelter, especially in winter. Okay, so what does all of this mean? Well, I was an English major in college, but I'll do some math today. It means that if nothing is done between now and September 22nd, when we are no longer able to house people temporarily in that 680 warehouse building, after those 57 days, over 135 men, women, and children will be living and sleeping on the streets. You'll find them under bridges. You'll find them in parks, outside of public buildings, and encampments all along the Hvac River. They'll be all over. One other issue with this situation, I don't mean to sound like I'm ripping off Game of Thrones here, but winter is coming. And I don't need to tell anybody in this room what winters in this area are like. What I do need to tell you is that last winter, on average, we had 90 parents and kids in our family shelter space alone. Those kids range from 2 weeks old through seniors in high school. That space in our building now it can house, per those organizations I named earlier, a maximum of 54 individuals. What I ask you to consider is this: how can you expect a child to survive, let alone thrive in an educational setting, particularly this upcoming fall when we're looking at more e-learning and remote learning as a possibility, when that child is sleeping under a bridge in negative 10-degree wind chills? How can you expect a woman who has been laid off and lost her housing to make it to a job interview when she's barely sleeping at night because she's terrified that someone is going to find her and all of her belongings in the tent that she has now set up on Heard's Island in Aurora? The answer is you can't. The truth is, without shelter, it's next to impossible to pull yourself out of homelessness. Shelter brings stability and shelter brings hope. So what needs to change? In the short term, that 680 temporary warehouse space that I mentioned, it needs to be winterized. And what this means is that updates to the building, including insulation, replacing a part of the roof, installing sufficient HVAC systems, and arranging for heated portable toilet and shower trailers to be brought to that space are needed. Estimates for that work are over $500,000. In order to shelter the homeless population in our community beyond just the upcoming winter, that same 680 warehouse space needs to be completely renovated. This work, which would build upon the temporary work I just mentioned, would involve creating effective and safely distanced sleeping spaces, kitchen and dining areas, and permanent bathroom and shower facilities. Initial projections for this work are somewhere between $7.5 and $10 million. If you are thinking that those numbers I just provided are daunting, you are not wrong. I am in full agreement with that. I do not disagree with you. But I can promise you this, that those numbers, as daunting as they are not nearly as daunting as the problem of homelessness that we currently face, and I assure you will only get worse as the economic downturn that we are experiencing continues to grow. Choosing not to invest in an appropriately sized facility for Hesed House would be catastrophic for the finances of both Kane County and the city of Aurora, as well as frankly put the lives of residents of those two areas at risk. Investing funds in Hesed House will ultimately provide a facility with enough space and flexibility to appropriately and safely serve the largest city in Kane County, both now and well beyond the COVID-19 crisis. I sincerely hope you consider Hesed House as a recipient of CARES Act funding for these endeavors. I look forward to partnering with you in creating a facility that will help us end homelessness, as we say at Hesed House, one person, one family at a time. Thank you very much for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Is there anyone else that would like to address the committee in the public? Anyone online? Hearing none, we'll go into the discussion items on our agenda. First item, status of funds available for current distribution. Mr. Rickard, is there any update from last week's meeting? All right. Continue to accrue interest at the rates that were reflected last week, I'm sorry. Yep. All right. I do have a question. We did, as a committee and as a board, approve a distribution to the health department for the contact tracing. And there was information in the news this last week about additional state funding coming to the counties for contact tracing. And I wondered at this point, Ms. Jeffers, if you could just address the committee on how that money, if in fact the county is going to receive funds for that, and how that would impact the prior requests that you made from our CARES Act funds.
Yes. So the funding that we're going to get from the state of Illinois will go from January to May. We have to do contact tracing through May 30th. The funding that I requested for from the CARES Act will take me through now through December.
So the roughly between $5 and $6 million is contact tracing between now and the end
December,
of the year.
yes, because we have to build the infrastructure, get our technology platform. It's all the framework, plus the 160 people. And then
There are no funds in the additional state increment that would cover some of those costs?
No. There's additional money that's coming for the community that the health department will not be eligible for. Community-based organizations that just came out Friday. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, no, so that 14 million is, I think it's 14.2. So that would go to places like federally qualified healthcare centers, which is like VNA, Greater Elgin, Aunt Martha's, any actually community-based organization that wants to engage in it.
All right.
So,
Any questions of our health department director regarding that issue? All right, thank you.
mhm.
All right, next item is staff requirements for administration. This was an issue that we had brought up last week regarding the state's attorney's office who's overseeing this process. There's been additional discussion with Scott Berger, and due to his expertise in dealing with grant programs like this. And the focus that we've always kept in the background with the guidance that we received from the task force that was established was that as we go through this process, it's critical that we're careful in terms of how we administer the programs or the funding distribution so that we have audit-worthy documentation because the federal government consistently does audit situations like this. And with the county having primary liability, it's important that we cover ourselves. So I know there's been additional discussion. Mr. McMahon has interviewed and I believe retained someone. So Mr. McMahon, do you want to address the committee on that?
I'm glad to. Good afternoon. So Mr. Berger and I did interview a potential candidate that I would hire as kind of a program manager. She would be an employee of the state's attorney's office. I have the funds within the current fiscal year budget to cover that cost, and then she would work with an outside consultant to essentially vet and document the cost reports.
All right, and so the internal person would be doing clerical work, administrative work in terms of administering the programs. The outside entity would provide professional assistance consistent with what I believe Mr. Martin mentioned at a prior meeting. We talked about an accounting firm having that expertise, but someone who has expertise in dealing with review of grant applications for compliance in terms of whether they appropriately fall within the criteria of the grant requests or the grant program and whether their documentation is appropriate. Is that accurate?
Short answer is yes. Bring in an outside expert who would verify compliance with program guidelines, but also that the file is essentially documented. So in the event when we go through an audit, that we have a complete file, it's documented, and it's documented. And the program director would work with the outside auditor, the outside consultant to make sure that our systems, both our systems and then our practices are in place.
All right, as it relates to the internal person that you have funded through your own budget, what is the approximate cost of that?
On an annual basis, so Mr. Berger and I have not finalized that number. On an annualized basis, I would say a salary, I think the dollar amount we posted was mid-50s, low to mid-50s.
And that would be for an entire year?
For an entire year, yes.
All right. And then with respect to the outside consultant, is that something in the other counties our neighbors have done?
Every Collar County has retained an outside consultant, and I received 2 proposals over the weekend, and then the second one was one over the weekend and one was this morning that Mr. Berger and I will review and have a recommendation, really I hope by a week from today, to this committee as to who you should retain.
All right. So there is a resolution that is for funding for the administration of the program. That would be item A. Is that something that you would expect us to consider at next week's meeting then, based on a specific proposal?
Yes, that's fine. That time frame's fine.
All right.
And that would still allow, just if I can, that would still allow for applications and distribution really within the next probably 5 weeks. So we're talking about around Labor Day where this money is starting to go out.
Right. With respect to the entities you're talking to, is there a range of cost that that you have in mind, or is that something you want to reserve until you make your presentation?
I'd really like to reserve that because each of the proposals have kind of a phased approach. So phase 1 would be working with us, with Mr. Berger, with myself, with our project manager to get the program up and running. That's one phase. The bulk of the work is going to be in reviewing these requests for reimbursement from municipalities, from different entities who you open up the program to. But there's some policy considerations for you all to make in that discussion. But that's where the bulk of the expense with an outside consultant will occur.
All right. Is there any, well, I would ask that before our meeting, if we're going to be considering this with a recommendation to move to the full board, that the, what I would say, the resume or scope of work and detail regarding who the proposed outside party would be provided to the entire board, so everyone can get educated and be prepared to answer questions.
Sure, and I'll try to have that to the entire board. It's Monday afternoon. Mr. Berger and I have to kind of coordinate our schedules to review this. Midweek, maybe Thursday at the latest. That way you have Thursday, Friday, and the weekend to review my recommendation to you.
Okay. Are there any questions regarding this component of the work? Anyone from the committee? Anyone at home that's online? All right. Thank you, Mr. McMahon.
Thank you.
All right. Next item is the application process in time frame. I want to talk about one issue that goes to this conceptually, because as you dig deeper into the technical aspects of this, the process it becomes more complicated, but I think it's appropriate that we are nimble and address circumstances that are changing, or at least become clearer as we go through it. When we started this process, the concept was we would have a intergovernmental agreement and an indemnity agreement that we would be coupled with an application for funding, and that is consistent with the state's attorney's recommendation, the manner in which this committee has agreed to move forward. And in a minute, we'll talk about approving that concept and getting a formal application ready to go. We also talked about the application process and time frame for turnaround, and once we sent out the application would be sent out to all of the entities that we, at least the local governmental entities that we perceive to be permissible applicants, that being cities, villages, park districts, forest preserve districts, and fire protection districts, and we'll talk about that a little bit more detail as well. But when we began this process, the concept that I think was understood, or at least was considered, was that when the municipalities made their applications, they would include in their application the request for reimbursement for fire districts, fire departments, and or potential economic business grants that they would consider be appropriate. And after talking through the process on the fire districts and actually getting into a little bit deeper on the technicalities regarding business grants, if that's something that this committee is inclined to do, based on legal advice and practical advice from both Mr. McMahon and Mr. Berger, it is in our best interest to do as many direct distributions as opposed to what I'll call conduit distributions, okay? So that, for example, with respect to the fire districts or fire departments, from a audit standpoint and a legal standpoint, it would be better for us to have distributions to the cities for their needs, but then have distributions directly to the fire districts instead of the fire districts receiving the money through the cities. Likewise, if we're inclined to have a business grant program, instead of providing the money to the cities directly, it's in our best interest to run the business grant program at the county level so that we have the direct relationship with the grant recipient. And that gives us the ability to control the documentation, the flow of funds, the criteria we would need for the distributions. Now, what that means is, we haven't decided, and that's one of the things that we need to consider, is what we choose to allocate to each component. But the size of the distribution to the cities themselves would necessarily be lower because we would have to accommodate the fire district and potential business grants within those municipal limits. But I don't see it causing a reduction in the amount that those municipalities would receive. The global amount would be the same for that community. It's just who would be the distributing entity. So I wanted to just run that concept by this committee to make sure that that's something that we would embrace going forward, because as we then approve the application and send out the notices, we need to send them out to the appropriate parties. And we need to make it clear to the cities and villages what should be included in their application and what should be omitted, as we will be dealing with those directly, for example, with the fire districts. So does anyone have any concern about that approach? I think that, I mean, the goal when we're done with this process is we'll have all the documentation in-house. We'll have as many direct contracts as we can have with outside parties, and we'll have control of all the documentation, and we can make it as a condition of the distribution that that documentation be in-house, so that we then can deal with the federal requirements.
John?
Mr.
Sturgis.
Sturgis.
So I had conversations, I had put out an email to the mayors up and down my area, and some of them responded back with their concern was their ability to even spend the allocation that they're going to be getting from us. And I say that at risk because acknowledging that my towns are like 3,000 people to 8,500 people, not 30,000 people. So,
Right.
you know, Gilbert, Sleepy, East, West, West, East, I guess. Their concern was we may not even be qualified to spend our money. And I don't know that we're going to Sleepy Hollow. I don't know that we're going to have all that. Gilbert's, you know, what happens to the leftover money that we don't use?
Well, and that's a good question.
But
I'm
specific.
not sure what the result of all the applications is going to be, but the original program that was discussed was an anticipated situation where we would provide a per capita distribution available to each region. And if you are counting county board districts, I know we all don't have the exact same population, but it's roughly the same based on the original census documentation. So part of your district's unincorporated, part of it's incorporated. The unincorporated will get a per capita distribution based on the number of people, as will the cities. If the cities don't use their entire fund, and that's why we're setting up a 14-day time frame, and we go through this process, and the total of all the municipal requests results in a return of funds to us. Those funds become available for grant programs or not-for-profits that would be in those areas potentially, and that's going to be further work that the board will have to deal with. You know, the one thing we have to keep in mind is the wish lists are significant. You can see the county's wish list is significant, but really this wasn't a program that was set up to replace revenue, at least by the current rules. It was really primarily deal with adapting to COVID-related expenses. So if those municipalities don't have those expenses, we can help out the community in different ways by providing business grants or other scenarios. It's just
So
that
the commitment I gave them was that, in my opinion, that money is meant to stay with the community. And inasmuch if there was grant programs or a way to funnel those extras into that grant program, then that could enhance, create from zero or enhance what we already have specific to that. And so if you're asking for dialogue, that's my dialogue.
okay, so I know that's an issue that, again, as we go through the process, we have to consider. But I think the initial scenario is anticipating if, in fact, there's money left over, and if one of your villages says, I would request that our money that is here be used for business grants because that's really the community need, that application wouldn't go to the village, it would come to the county. And that's kind of the big picture item that I'm dealing with. And the question is, does the county target that to your municipalities because they didn't expend their entire amount? That's something that's open for discussion. I don't think we have to decide that now. That's probably 2 weeks from now or 3 weeks from now as we go through and get the applications out and get those back to see what's left over.
And I wouldn't necessarily characterize it as their inability to spend those funds as much as possibly making a conscious choice that they'd prefer to spend those funds enhancing the small businesses that are
Right.
suffering. So
Okay.
just for what it's worth.
And I think that's a fair question, and it's appropriate for consideration. So, you know, as you get to the issue that Hesed House raised, if we're dealing with not-for-profit requests, Hesed House is an Aurora-based entity, but deals with a big portion of the county. You know, as you go north, Lazarus House is in the Tri-City area, and as we go north, we have other facilities up north, too, that deal with this situation. So those are all items, I think, that are open for discussion, and in fairness, we'll keep those open as we move forward. Mr. Frost?
I had mentioned previously about, you know, and I'd like to, as we move through this, I'd like to hear what Mr. McMahon and Mr. Berger have to say. But as far as a spend by date or allocate by date, you know, of October 1st roughly, so that we have time to reallocate and not just have it drop back on our lap at the last minute.
Right.
So something we'll have to keep an eye on.
As we do that.
Couple more committee meetings, we'll be right there.
Right. All right, so if there's no objection, Mr. Hanson.
It's not an objection, it's, thank you. It's not an objection, it's really concurrence with what Drew just said. There, people that have talked to me about it, I believe there should be a second round, whether it be for municipalities or for, should our board decide to go this direction, for small business applications or grants. Some folks may not feel the need to spend their entire per capita allocation as a municipality right now. And they may say enough's enough at whatever round two happens to be, October the 1st, October the 15th, and say, we can't spend it. Please build my additional $150,000, our additional $200,000 into your existing business aid program, and it needs to be targeted towards these zip codes. And if that means an additional amount goes, a larger amount goes to an approved applicant, or perhaps you've ask those chambers and those municipalities to get their businesses to ask a little bit harder or to try harder, do it that way. But 2 rounds, it seems like a lot to ask because we're kind of behind, in my opinion. That's the way it should go.
All right, recognizing that the funds have to be invested by the end of the year, so that date may even get moved up if it's necessary.
Correct. And I think in round 1 for the municipalities, they probably already have a plan in place. It's a matter of getting the application to them.
Right.
And I would assume they've got their ask already and ready to go.
All right, any other comments of the committee? All right, then with respect to the application and intergovernmental and indemnity agreements, Mr. McMahon, are we at a point where we have a finalized draft?
We do. I have 15 sets of the intergovernmental agreement, the application, and an FAQ for you this morning. It's a resolution on your agenda item. If you would like to move that and vote on that, that would be helpful. The one amendment that I would ask for is that in the event that as I work through this process with the consultant, that if we need to modify that, that I can do that without having to come back before this committee. But what's in front of you is what I think is if not a final product, very close to a final product. I want some input from the consultant.
All right, and you've taken into account the comments you've received over the last couple of weeks from the committee members and board members and members of staff?
Yes.
And this is really a culmination of what other counties have used with tailored to Kane County's specific needs.
Exactly right.
All right.
And we sent that out via email, I think, a week ago today. I don't believe we received any additional comments or proposals to modify or, edit it further in the last week. So it's ready to go today.
All right, does anyone on the committee have any questions regarding the application, intergovernmental agreement, and indemnity agreement as drafted? All right, then, Mr. Hanson, I'm sorry, Ms. Thomas?
Thank you. So reading through the application and FAQs, the initial draft talked about, contact person, email, where applications and attachments should be sent. And that's concerning to me. So, this should be like an electronic form, a portal, but if it's not, one note that I put in my feedback was, is this essentially one document, right? Application, all attachments, one document being sent to whoever the contact is. So things aren't lost, in the shuffle of email.
Mhm.
Or is that to be worked out depending who?
So if I understand your question, you'd like this on to be a web-based application that can be accessed and submitted electronically?
Well, that would be most efficient,
Okay.
if we have the ability to do that.
Well, I think we have the ability, and I'm glad to work with Mr. Fonstock and his team to make it a web-based application and
If it's not going to add more time to the,
Yeah, that's the question. And I mean, what that time, there's time involved in that
Yeah.
commitment.
Are you asking me? Or you
the
want-
more of a
Yes.
question.
Mr.
So-
Fonstock?
The application, as long as you have the legal, agreement and document that you want, completing the form or designing a form to have it be brought back into the county can be done probably in a couple days at most. I mean, we've done some forms in under a day if it's required. It matters a lot how much you have it prepared for it.
I think given the time constraints here, if within the scope of the mandate that we give or the direction we give to the state's attorney's office, they can accommodate a web-based solution, then we'd ask them to do that. But otherwise, sending it out in an email format will be what we'll direct them to do, if that's okay, Ms. Thomas.
Just wanted to clarify.
All right. Mr. Hanson?
Thank you. There's going to be an outside set of eyes, a consultant, if you will, for this. It's my hope that an IGA and whatever census issues there are ironed out and done for that person to be looking at in day one, so that there's no further delay beyond that. An application process, it sounds like it's not difficult for a talented team to put together really quickly, but I'd like to think that the application as proposed, an IGA that your department's already approved, and the census, whatever issues remain out there have been resolved so that it can be expedited.
All right, the census is a separate item we need to talk about, but with respect to the application itself, but for that issue, are you okay with the?
I'm okay with it.
Application is drafted.
If someone new is coming on board, I'd like for them to see all these nebulous items ironed out before they even
Right.
Okay.
All right,
Jump on board.
Mr. Surges?
But do we have consensus amongst us here to move this without delaying? I mean, if we're not final, but we're, an inch away, can we just empower
yeah.
John to say,
Well, my intention would be to pass the resolution approving that as one action that we would take formally today, yes. Right. Mr. Martin?
thank you.
Long before he achieved global stardom, the 100 million record-selling artist.
John, could you speak?
I know that there's been input from fire protection districts and everyone else. Do we have any pending issues with any of the governmental bodies as to the content of the form? Or are we all on the same page here?
The input that I've received has been from board members, kind of internal folks to the county. The communication that I've had with outside entities, fire districts, municipalities, et cetera, has been on either the process or kind of a letter that outlines the expenses that they have incurred from March through the present, and that they hope to get reimbursement for. It's kind of the two categories of communication that I've had.
So we haven't, John, I haven't received anything from any municipality expressing concern. Their desire is simply to get the application so they could submit it.
Well, all I want to do is just know that we're all headed in the same direction with the same understanding as we move into the application process, so we don't have a interpretive issue.
We may have an interpretive issue. I just don't know. I'm kind of guessing about, how they're going to react when they get the application. The only feedback that I've received from other government entities has been on the census question, not so much on the application. Certainly, they're interested in the sequencing, the timing of the application, the distribution of the funds, eligible expenses for reimbursement, things like that. Not so much on the kind of the details of the application.
Well, and I was thinking more about eligible expenses. I mean, everybody's going to have a list of what they want. I just want to make sure that when the applications come in, that the applications or the viewpoint of the applicants is consistent with what we think as a board is.
If they come in inconsistently, then we'll figure that out at that point. I think any grant program and I know we have a working relationship with the municipalities, but it's really the county's program, and it's incumbent on us to make sure the application contains all the information we need to withstand the audit ultimately to meet the program criteria.
It's a question of time again to know that we're starting off in a direction that's consistent with understood goals.
Right. Is everyone comfortable moving forward with the, Mr. Chairman?
Just the reference to there's a package of information that did you say that there's 20 copies of that?
We brought additional copies of the application, the intergovernmental agreement, and the FAQ, frequently
Good.
asked questions. We kind of put a document together.
Good. May I have a copy?
Absolutely.
May I have
That was
one
what
of
was
those?
emailed out earlier in the week.
We have
No,
more
it was
copies today. A week
today.
ago, I sent out redlined versions
All right.
of those 3 documents. Received no additional comments to today. We brought final copies
Clean
today.
copies, all right.
And I'll pass those out today, and I'll send them out by email to everybody, so there's an electronic copy as well.
Okay. In the redlined copy, there was some dark blue and some dark green highlighting, which made the changes difficult to read. Is your team confident that that all of us will be able to understand what's being said in those?
It's my hope we try to make it as clear and straightforward and eliminate as much legalese as possible, but it's a legal document. It's a big program. There are a lot of requirements, and there's a fair amount of what I would call legalese in the document that I think is necessary.
And we changed from being recipient and sub-recipients to direct recipients, what John refers to as the conduit versus the direct.
Correct.
And so that was a major evolution
Believe
in
so,
that
yes.
agreement. I agree with Ms. Thomas that the idea of the email address and the phone number and the contact people who these applications are supposed to be sent to is crucial, because before you know who it's going to go to, who's going to do the work, don't really know how to estimate, what labor is going to be necessary. On page 2 of the application, there was our requested funds expected to be spent by 12/30/20, and that, whatever you call that circle, that has an automatic answer already on it. And I would suggest that we don't fill out any part of the application for the applicant. If we're going to do that, because, well, they have to spend it by the 20th, well then, or by the 30th, then there will be a number of different questions that are the same way, that if you don't fill it out this way, then you're disqualified. So just that one had the bullet already put in. I would suggest that the pages be numbered. It says that if I think it's page 3, required attachments, invoices and receipts if seeking reimbursement. And I think, and I'm not sure that I follow all of it, but I think all of this now is reimbursement. So that would mean that invoices and receipts would be mandatory. It's requiring an audited financial statement signed by licensed CPA. I'm not sure that everybody, all of our applicants have. Actually, I'm positive that all of our applicants don't have those. Many will, but there will be some who won't. Number 22, frequently asked question on the version that I reviewed. It said something about that people can apply up to 12/30/20. Now, maybe that was just an earlier version and I got lost in the drafts. But in 22, it was apply up to 12/30/20, and it'd be impossible to spend it and get it back to them Because, for instance, in number 23, in frequently asked questions, it has 30 days anticipated turnaround. Substantive, an important matter early on was the treasurer's recommendation that we set this up as we've set up other agreements, intergovernmental agreements with local governments, where the security or the collateral is the tax levy. It's possible that I just missed it and that it might have been in one of those darkly shaded areas, but I didn't see that referred to. Is that still in the agreement?
I had discussed that with the state's attorney early on in the process. And when we got into levies for subsequent years, there was an issue of the legality and enforceability of that. And so it was based on that, that concern that issue, at least in my initial discussion with the state's attorney, was omitted from that. Do you recall that discussion, Mr. McMahon?
I do recall the discussion. So the ability to kind of claw back funds that have been, I don't want to use the word advance, but paid to a municipality is really limited by statute. The treasurer is obligated by law to distribute funds that he holds that are collected on behalf of other taxing districts. And he has to do that within a statutory time frame. And there's no lawful authority to withhold that. And so that's in large part why that section of the intergovernmental agreement in the application was modified.
It doesn't preclude the county, though, from seeking recovery if there were losses incurred due to improper use of funds from the
Absolutely, we could still pursue it. It's just that we wouldn't be able to take money or withhold money that the treasurer is legally obligated to disperse within a statutory timeframe upon receipt.
Okay, so would you be saying then that the agreements that we've had with various townships, for instance, I know that St. Charles Township, maybe it was the Road Commission or maybe it was St. Charles Township in the past, was that somehow fundamentally different? Because that was exactly what the collateral and security was for that agreement, that we had first requirement on that levy.
I'm saying the enforceability of it is suspect down the road.
Really? That's taken place in the last 5 or 6 years.
And I don't think in the last 5 or 6 years we've had to enforce it legally.
Well, no, we haven't had to enforce it, but I can tell you one person in this room who, actually 2 people in this room who relied on the legal advice that we got that was enforceable.
Right.
That's quite a departure.
So with respect to the comments about numbering pages, I assume that can be incorporated in, and ultimately the application is issued will include whatever time frame we agree on here as directed by the committee, correct?
Yes, we can do that quickly.
All right. So is there, well, let's just skip down then with respect to the timing, the time frame. We agreed that once the applications go out, it's a 14-day turnaround time. Is that still the will of the committee? All right. All right, so then with respect to item B, which is the resolution approving the IGA and application, is there a motion to approve the application with the clarification that the pages be numbered, that the 14-day time frame be included in the application? Mr. Frost moves.
And I'm asking that you allow me to revise it, make final revisions after the consultant is.
Right. Or as needed by, yes, the third item would be to allow state's attorney to make revisions based on input from the consultant and/or as in order to comply with future treasury regulations because they seem to be coming out frequently.
Thank you.
It's moved by Mr. Frost, second by Ms. Thomas. Any discussion? Mr. Surgis?
Yeah, go ahead.
Mr.
Listen,
Surgis?
I was very comfortable knowing that the clawback, if you will, was available. Are we saying that we're not putting it, is there a detriment to having it in there? I'm way more comfortable having it in there. We'll fight about it later if we need to, but let's keep it in.
Well, the change is that we are going to, we're bringing in a consultant. We're going to reimburse these expenses as opposed to issuing kind of a grant, and then they report to us later how the money was
So different
used.
tactic altogether.
Totally
model.
different tactic.
Got it.
So they're going to submit their application for reimbursement of expenses. We're going to review those from a program consistency, a compliance consistency, and a legal perspective.
So oftentimes in my career, I use an outside consultant when I want to say shift liability to them rather than hold it in with me. Do we have that situation here, or are we 100% on this if we screw this up? Or
So-
does the intent of the
I
question?
do know the question. The former, I guess is what I'm saying. We're shifting some of the risk to an outside consultant.
Okay.
We're also
We have
being more
risks.
diligent because we'd be retaining someone who's been through the war before, so that if we have the documentation that's expected based on their experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think also to your point, Cliff, the issue of exposure to liability as opposed to saying, all right, you've applied for $2 million, here's your 2 million, give us the receipts later. If we get that up front, we minimize our risk because that's really, and if they're compliant in terms of what they're giving us, that will be, make it a lot easier.
As long as the modeling has changed, I understand.
Right. All right, any further discussion, Barb?
I just still want to be the voice for the unincorporated areas in Kane County. I just want to make certain the townships are sent the applications in the packet as well.
That's the, coming up on one of the other items, and we'll
Okay.
make sure that's covered.
Okay.
All right, Ms. Thomas.
Thank you. I don't disagree with allowing input from the consultant, but I don't want that to hold up this process. I mean, if we are comfortable that we have sufficiently captured most of what we need, I think the application should be made available as soon as possible
So we're,
while we're working to secure the consultant.
It's not going to hold it up. Both consultants that I've talked with and their proposals that we're reviewing have been incredibly responsive. Well into the evening, Saturdays, Sundays, they've been incredibly responsive, and I expect that to continue.
Okay.
all right, any further comments? Hearing none, please call the roll. This is item B, correct?
Hanson,
Aye.
Kenyon, Ross,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
Boucher.
Yes.
Yes.
All right, then to Ms. Wanicki's comment, item F is the notice to permissible recipients. Mr. McMahon, with respect to the notice then to go out, you have accumulated a list of potential of the appropriate recipients, meaning the municipalities in the county, the park districts, forest preserve districts, townships, fire protection districts, all will receive a notice?
I have started creating a list. I don't believe, as I stand here today, that I have a complete list.
Right.
But we'll work with, I think, Scott's office, Mr. Berger's office, and others to get that.
Mr.
out.
Armstrong's office has a list,
Okay.
can provide that to you, so
Great.
everyone will be sent. And if you could do the committee a favor and send us copies of the note, or just the list of entities that receive notice, so that if someone is left off the list, the board members can keep an eye on that, and if they have the entity that they felt was appropriate recipient, they can give you feedback.
I will.
All right. Then the plan would be, after 14 days, then we do our vetting process, and we'll be discussing the applications as they come in. Can you comment on the item of the census, which seems to be a sticking point that we've been working through?
I can. So we have looked at, and I've had a number of conversations with representatives of different groups, and I've heard from village presidents and village administrators. And what you really need is a neutral government source that establishes population. So my advice to you is that you use the United States Census data from 2019. That way we are using the exact same data set that the federal government used in determining each state's share of the CRF funds. And then we have a consistent application kind of all the way through this process, starting with the federal government and determining the amount of money that they allocated to each individual state, to the county, and now we use that same data set to distribute money to municipalities or other units of local government.
Anyone on the committee?
Was I mistaken in my understanding that the 2019 data wasn't specific by town?
Yes.
So we have what we have done is put together an allocation based on census data by municipality. And I've worked with Mr. Berger's office to come up with those numbers.
With respect to the census numbers, given the way we set up we obviously we have to come up with a final number. And the census numbers are relevant in respect to a couple of issues, Mr. Surgis. One is if a municipality made a request for reimbursement for an amount in excess of what would be allocated to that municipality based on census figures, then we would have that serve as the limit. We've also put in a buffer to say that the initial allocation was 80% of what the municipality would otherwise qualify for. So if there remains a census dispute, I mean, obviously we have to resolve that at some point. That's got to come to a head. It's got to come into, it's got to be a number that's mutually agreed to. I know that last time we were here, there were a few municipalities, including St. Charles was one of them, which is, my constituency. They were objecting, but at some point, I think we have to just make a decision as to which route we're going to take so we can move the program forward. I think there is still some ability to adjust as we go through the process until we get the exact numbers in as they work for that. So, and ideally, we would have had a set number in place right now, but we just don't have that.
Sure, but John, I thought the whole intent from the last meeting was that we don't want to be the referee in this case, that they have their council of mayors.
Right.
And that we were pushing it back on them to say, come back within a certain date with an agreed number.
And we
Do
don't.
they not have that, or we're unable to come up with that?
No, the last number, and Mayor Burns is here today, but the last documentation we got was that, and I'll just pick a number, let's say there's 25 municipalities, 20 agreed, and there were 5 that were objecting and had questions. Now, the other feedback we got from the group was that if the request for modification to those 5 was made, that the 20 other entities wouldn't object. Now, during last week, I received comments from Mr. Copey. Also, you've alluded to it, that some of the village presidents from the small towns may object because they feel they're not being given the same credence we are. And I'm not sure if all those towns are part of the group that is represented by the group as a whole. And so we've got to make sure everyone's treated fairly. The issue is, how do we bring that to a head? And so if, Mr. McMahon, on that issue, if your opinion is based on the recommendation that if someone were to challenge what we were doing, we would have a defensible position based on using some set criteria that was independent of our own, despite the fact that we're unable to do our own census in a 3-week or 4-week period.
So that's ultimately what it came down to. We were never going to be able to pick one data set that was going to satisfy everybody. And so my advice was to go back to a neutral, independent, government-based source of population and rely on that data set. And the most neutral, independent one that is available to me and to recommend to you is the 2019 census data. And so that's why I made that recommendation. It's
It
not,
seems like there's a whole bunch of Mickey Mousing going around if we had that 2019 set from the get-go. We should have just, boom, here it is.
We do
If-
have it.
If we, if there was a scenario where all the municipalities agreed to a set of numbers that was different from that 2019, if we had sign-on from all the municipalities, would that change your opinion?
if it was based on government data, yes.
All right. Mr. Frost?
Could we just, using those figures that Mr. McMahon's mentioned, could we just make notification as soon as possible to the municipalities and say, you know, here's the number we're planning on using. If you have an alternate idea, you have to bring it to us so we can resolve it within 2 weeks.
That's what we had been attempting to do, and, but certainly that's an option. Ms. Thomas, you had a question? Here's the bottom line on this issue. You know, there was one census figure that came way low for Aurora. That was Mr. Armstrong's figure. Then we came back to a figure that was higher, that was based on these current numbers that seemed acceptable to Aurora. But when that happened, Elgin's numbers went down. And so the major objector in the group, the entity with the highest count of population based on what is being presented now is the Elgin number.
Correct. That's where the biggest kind of discrepancy is in all of the data.
Now, as a matter of percentage of population, you could say Maple Park has a big argument because, you know, they're 200 people in Maple Park is a much bigger percentage of their population than it is in Elgin. But Elgin had the greatest head count differential. Yeah.
Right.
So at the last meeting, we were looking at the 2010 census data or numbers, and now we're talking about 2019 census data. At the last meeting, I took note that 5 municipalities had objections. Today, I'm not sure how many we're talking about. Is it more than the 5 previously mentioned? And this is my concern raised last time. Everyone can make an argument, and I would like us to make a decision today. Is it 2010 census data or 2019? And we've had this information, which came through Cmap, for several weeks. And so I would just call on us to make a decision today, 2010 data or 2019.
But it sounds like it's 2019.
2019 is what I have looked at and relied on to.
Mayor Burns, do you want to give the perspective of the group you're representing?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This will be very brief, ladies and gentlemen. The reality is the 2019 estimated census numbers are what Metro West concurs with. We also understand, as the chairman has pointed out, and as others, I think, instinctively understand, there may be some municipalities that have a disagreement. If that disagreement exists, it is up to that municipality to argue their point respectfully. But as an organization representing the municipalities in Kane County, we stand steadfast with the 2019 estimated census numbers.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
John?
Just add that the Treasury Department, when they made this allocation, they relied on the 2019 census data. And that's a big reason why I'm recommending that we use their data as we continue to move this money through the process to the intended recipients.
Mr. Chairman?
Thank you, Mr. Hochheit. Let's see. That was, your memory is not failing you, Mr. Surgis.
That's not what Audrey said.
Is it 2019? That was the easy answer about 2 or 3 weeks ago, because that's what the federal government used, so we could be consistent. The problem with that is that where we have towns that bleed over county borders, the U.S. The U.S. Treasury numbers were county only. Now, I think that Mr. McMahon said that we did further analysis to the individual towns. For instance, Algonquin, Aurora, Elgin, Huntley, Maple Park, all of those bled over. But I think in one of the pieces that Mr. McMahon mentioned, they did further analysis to come up with an adjusted 2019 census. So it's, unfortunately, you know, Aurora is broken into 4 different counties. And so the Treasury Department just gave us the county. So did I listen closely enough, Mr. McMahon, that you did further analysis to break down the cities, and there's probably 8 to 9 of them that go across Kane County boundaries?
So I have a Kane population by municipality. When you include the municipal population and the unincorporated population, those numbers total to 532,403 residents of Kane County. And then we have that broken down by, to use your example, Algonquin, and the Kane portion of Algonquin that I believe represents 8,813. And then we go through that with a category or an itemization.
What's the Aurora number, Mr. McMahon, in your calculation?
130,608.
Can I make a suggestion to this committee? So, because I don't think we're going to, despite Ms. Thomas's desire to resolve this issue, can we formally send out that to all the interested parties and ask if there's an objection? We have that, and we need it so that we can consider it next week.
Yes, I'll send it out.
Mr. Chairman, we've had this information in front of us, and so I'd like to move that this committee base per capita funding distributions on the U.S. Census Bureau 2019 population estimates.
What's the Elgin number?
The Elgin number for the Kane County portion is 86,153. Now, I want to point out, we heard, not me directly, but it was forwarded to me, a communication from the mayor of Elgin who provided a different number, and I don't know the exact number, but I know it was higher than the 86,000. I think, my recollection, it was somewhere around 90 to 91,000.
All right, so Ms. Thomas, I understand your desire to get this done, but I also can tell you that if we move forward on this basis, we're going to have to deal with the Elgin issue. So, you know, and I'm inclined to move forward based on St. Charles objecting to the number to move this forward. But I'm not inclined to leave Elgin, you know, we're going to get stalled when the Elgin constituency has to deal with that issue. So that's my concern. Believe me, I want this over as much as you do. Mr. Chairman?
The numbers that are being quoted are Cmap numbers. That 8813 for Algonquin was Cmap. Aurora's 130,608 was Cmap. The Elgin 86,153 was Cmap. And so I appreciate what's being said. I don't think anyone in the room, has taken a look at the 2019 county and then the cities, towns, and villages further calculation from some census. I haven't seen those. I don't know if anyone in this room has seen those. But there's an additional piece that you might want to look at, and that's that 97 other counties had funds distributed to them based on the Department of Revenue statistics. And so that's, now, do they make huge differences? Maybe to the towns that have short, but tried to take 2019, the county numbers, through the DCEO, Office of Financial Management, where LGDF distribution is sent out based on those census. You say, well, my gosh, if we're already sending them based on a set of numbers, why don't we use those numbers? Unfortunately, the difference between those sets of numbers is about 15,797 people in Kane County. So
is that more or less than the 530?
It is less. It's less. Now, It's possible that you spread that prorated over, but that's imprecise. But I think that Mr. McMahon has done a calculation in his staff and team that gives us the 2019 consistent with the US Treasury number. And if that's the case, those sound good, but the 4 examples that were used were all the Cmap numbers. Now, it's possible that that is equal to, I doubt it, because the Department of Revenue numbers are about 380 less in Algonquin. The Aurora number is 368 people more. Elgin is 2,000 people more. That's being quoted so far. I think that it is important that that calculation is shared then with the group, the CAAC group.
All right, Mr. Frost.
Where does Cmap get their numbers? I don't know that. I don't think they go out and count people. And so I do agree with Mr. McMahon, is we need to use a bona fide, this is a U.S. government, federal agency that counts people. And I think we need to use that number and stick with it. And because I have no idea, with all due respect to Cmap, how they came about those numbers. If they're matching on so many points, they might be using the census numbers. So I think we have to stick with it. And I don't think there's any higher place we can go than that.
All we want to do is get this right. I mean, and so it's not an exact science, and that's what we understand. So why don't we do this then? If Ms. Thomas is suggesting, you can make a motion regarding the census numbers that we use, the numbers that Mr. McMahon has outlined for us. I simply would, and we could approve going forward on this, but I would like him to publish those to the municipalities, and if there's an objection, we always can consider that. Is that your desire?
Yes.
All right. Is there a second to that, Mr. Frost? All right. Any discussion?
As long as there's a provision for appealing.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, Doug Shefflow.
Mr. Shefflow?
So I think there is a misunderstanding from what I've been gleaning that the Census Department has not created city census numbers by county. And they haven't actually taken a census in 2019. So they're all estimates. Cmap created estimates based on available data, not by counting people. But my main point is that one, we need to send this data out, or these lists, to the county board members as well as the citizens. I'm looking at the list from our last board meeting, and it has Aurora at 91,000. I think that's wrong. I think it's a lot higher, but if it's 40,000 higher, that has to come out of all the other cities and villages fund, because it's a zero-sum game. We've got X dollars, and we need to divide it up based on population. So, I mean, I think we need to compare those lists, and I would like whatever Mr. McMahon's going to send to send it to the county board members.
All right, so we've, that's the point well taken, Mr. Shefflow, and I think the committee is committed to get this right. It's not a perfect process, but we have a motion and a second to move forward with the base numbers that Mr. McMahon has outlined for us. And I think what he'll do is, if we succeed in passing this motion, circulate it, and we can discuss tweaks to that if there's justification as we move forward. There'll be, and as you see, as we go through the process, we'll have some buffer built into this that would allow us to do that.
Can I ask one more question?
Yes.
So, has the committee seen these numbers?
Yes.
Okay.
Excuse me.
And where would I find them?
Could we hear from Metro West? Because they sent these numbers out at least 2 weeks ago.
Yes, they've been. Mr. Burns? Mayor Burns?
The numbers that State's Attorney McMahon has provided you are the numbers that we provided State's Attorney McMahon. Again, we stand by those numbers that are the estimated 2019 census figures. We understand there might be some discrepancies from some select communities. We respect that, but we as an organization are not going to fight those respective battles together. We will allow those communities to wage those battles as they see fit.
Does everyone acknowledge receiving what the numbers were from Cmap? Mr. Chairman?
Is that what we're,
And for the nomenclature beneficiary or benefit, they're not CMAP numbers per se. We worked with CMAP based on the estimated. With respect to those estimated numbers, from an organizational perspective.
All right, if anyone has adjustments to the committee, we have a motion, a second. Is there any further comments?
yes. If we can have, if this is, if these are the, okay, I'm not supposed to say CMAP. I guess Metro West. So these are the Metro West numbers.
Yes, sir.
This is
Wait, could you
I-
please address the chair so
2019,
we do this? Mr. McMahon, do you have the list that we could share with the, could we get copies of the list that you have?
Yes, and just let me clear this up. So the source of my numbers, they may have, and they did provide numbers to me. They've provided numbers to a lot of people. But the numbers that I'm relying on are published by the U.S. Census Bureau. There's a hyperlink. I'll send this out electronically. It contains an electronic link to the U.S. Census data, population estimates, using 2019 estimates. I'll send that out so you can see exactly what I used and you can see the source. But yes, I will make that available, and I'll go make copies of what I have today. Here, I can go upstairs and make copies if that's what you would like.
Okay, the question that we were responding to was, have the people in this room seen these numbers? And that was all that I was saying.
So the answer is yes. All right.
No,
so-
actually, the answer
No,
from the
Mr.
recipient
Chairman,
is
you
no.
asked me, I'm just providing the answer. If you don't appreciate it or you don't agree with it, you're entitled to your opinion.
Why
but
would we
we're
have to
gonna move on.
distribute?
All right, so is there we have a motion and a second, any further discussion? Mr. Hanson.
Mr.
clarity,
Chairman?
Are we voting on consensus to use a set of data? I don't see a resolution to attach this to. I'm just-
No, it's consensus of the
Okay.
committee, yes. All right,
Mr. Chairman, Alan here.
yes, Ms. Allen?
My question for Mr. McMahon is, do his numbers show Elgin being divided into Cook County and DuPage County, Aurora being divided into 4 counties? I know there's a website that does that, but I don't know, I can't tell you right offhand which one it is.
Mr. McMahon?
So the numbers that I have break out Elgin population by its Kane County population. I do not have the Cook County portion of Elgin in my numbers. And as I said earlier, the number that I have kind of on my table is 86,153. I understand that the mayor communicated, and I received some information this morning that the city of Elgin believes that that number should be closer to 91,000 for the city of Elgin. That is by far, as was pointed out earlier, the biggest discrepancy in the data that I have as it relates to population.
Thank you.
All right, any further discussion for the committee at this point? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Hanson,
Yes.
Kenyon. Ross,
Yes.
Burgess,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
Oshite.
Yes. All right, and Mr. McMahon, you'll circulate those numbers, and if anyone has any objections, they can bring them back to us for further discussion.
Yes, I will.
Yes, Mr. Hanson.
I'm sorry, it should have been part of the discussion. And in these, the goal is to get a set of population figures, a set of data that everyone agrees to. And whatever gets figured out, whatever gets agreed to, that'll be part of the application process for the municipality. They'll be signing off saying that the little town, the big town, that population is a part of the application process. So when they sign off on that, they'll be agreeing, or they'll be certifying that population.
Yes and no. In one sense, I mean, we're telling them, when we adopt this population data set, we're telling them what their population is and what their potential allocation would be. There is a certification process part of the application, but that's a little bit different than them coming to us and saying, our population is whatever. We're determining the population, and we're making that determination based on the 2019 population estimates compiled by the U.S. Census Bureau.
All right, moving on in our agenda, the next item that I'd like to discuss is the overall allocation of funds. And there's a handout here that was prepared that has two scenarios on it. I'd like to focus on this next because I think this is a item of discussion to clarify a point that the chairman made at last month's meeting, and over the weekend, having discussions with the state's attorney and Mr. Berger in terms of how we approach this process. There are two scenarios. I just want to present them to you, and these are for discussion purposes only. We have some placeholders in here. Numbers are not exact, but I ask that we prepare some scenarios. And Mr. Berger's here to fill in if I explain this improperly. The first scenario starts at the top by saying the county allocation shows the total amount that's available for distribution. It's been suggested that we consider maintaining a contingency fund that would be used to deal with circumstances that come up as we go through the process. It could be used for a number of issues, such as population adjustments, as we just discussed. It could be issues with respect to needs that come up in the immediate future that we didn't anticipate. It could be used for costs of the program. It could be used for a number of things. And I think at least the suggestion is that we come up with some number for a contingency fund, knowing that ultimately those funds will be made available for distribution within the program cycle. That number could be zero if we decide to go without a contingency. The number that I suggested we put in was $5 million. That's just a stakeholder number. We can change that if we choose to do it. The other deduction would be administration costs. We've heard a little bit about today about the cost of administering the program. We'll know more about that next week, but we need to include some number for that to be taken out of the program, because it's understood with any federal grant program that the county is entitled to reimburse for the costs that we incur in implementing the grant program. And so that gets us down to a net number. If you go to the right column, that net number allocated according to some census numbers that we used as a basis for our discussion earlier, breaks down an amount into the county's portion of 55%, and then the 45% allocated to the unincorporated part of Kane County and the incorporated part of Kane County into two columns. So that's how those numbers were reached. On the left-hand side, then going further down under the column proposed uses, we have the 48 million is the county side. That's just brought down from the right-hand column. And then we have other uses that we need to consider in here. We've got municipal uses. We have fire protection districts uses. The $1 million number was a number that was discussed, I think, at last week's meeting for covering the fire protection districts. That number may be greater, but we need to discuss that number. Other units of local government would cover park districts, forest preserve districts, townships. Unincorporated areas would be, that would be, when it says development committee, that's the share that would be allocated to the development committee for consideration in the unincorporated area. And then in this list, we inserted an amount for business grants and for not-for-profit grants, okay? And this is, you know, at some time, the committee has discussed having a business grant program. It also discussed providing some funding for not-for-profit organizations. That was, our willingness to do that was in part based on availability of funding, but since, let me go up to the business grant program. Originally, we had discussed taking that money from, or at least having the cities be the conduit entity for those funds to the extent that the cities wanted to do a business grant program. Based on the fact that we're going to do direct grants for that if we choose to do so, because we want to eliminate the conduit nature of that grant for compliance purposes. We should, if we're going to do a program, identify a number that we would make available for that. And then, like, same with not-for-profits. The not-profit organizations wouldn't be conduit grants through the cities. They would be direct grants from us in whatever program we choose to do. The difference between, so if you then go to the right-hand column, the breakdown by area, the difference between scenario 1 and scenario 2, and Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, is how we allocate the business grants and not-profit grants. Do we take them all from the municipal share, or do we share them across the board first and then have the county and the municipality share in those grants? So I believe the first example, scenario 1, is where we would take them from the municipal share, and scenario 2 is where we would take it off the top from the county share, with the county share and the municipality share being reduced to accommodate those numbers. Is that accurate, Mr. Berger? All right, so the reason that we need to have this discussion now is we've had a number of, well, we've discussed business grants. The members of this committee and the board members that I've talked to have considered business grants. In the original discussion with the municipalities, they had a desire to do business grants. But because we're saying to the municipalities, don't include your request for business grants in your application, if we're going to do business grants, we should set aside money for it. And we need to come up with a number for that. There is a second handout, and this is for homework, that is, if we're going to do a business grant program, these are the parameters we would need to discuss to include in those programs. And that isn't something I want to discuss. I don't think we have time today to do that, but we'll ultimately, if we're going to do a business grant program at a meeting that we'll hold in the near future, we need to go through those criteria to come up with our own business grant program. We have other counties that we can use as resources to see what they've done. There is a spreadsheet, a much more detailed spreadsheet that has been put together that we'll share with committee members that talks about what other places have done. But what I wanted to do is bring this to the committee today to talk about the business grants and not-for-profit grants. Is it the desire of this committee to move forward with an allocation of a certain amount of money for those programs now, and therefore reducing it from either the county share or the municipal share or both? Or do we wait until we go through the first round with the municipal grants and go through the county grants and then evaluate what would be left over and then decide if we have additional funding to use those funds for that purpose. I know we had presentation this morning. We had presentation last week and the week before, I believe, from not-for-profits that certainly have needs. I think in fairness, though, if we're going to provide funding, we should let them know if there's I don't want to create an expectation, but if there's going to be money, we should identify that and set it aside. Mr. Frost.
I've spoken on this many times, but I really don't want to wait for small business relief for later on in the process. As I've mentioned, there's people making decisions and worrying themselves to death right now about whether they're going to keep their business alive and thriving or not. So we need to get it out there. The one thing I've had a hard time doing is coming up with what's the population of business? I've looked at a few individual towns. I know Mr. Hanson mentioned the Census Bureau has some things, but trying to calculate how much we should set aside is kind of tough because I don't know if there's also a surprising number of eligible businesses that probably won't apply, unfortunately. So I would ask, maybe Mr. Berger could look into that as far as if there's percentages out there on what other programs have hit. Is there 4,000 businesses in King County? I don't know. So we need to get some data to go by.
I think that's a relevant question. As you get into the weeds on this, then the question is how much is appropriate to set aside and what do we desire to set aside? With the number that's just reflected in here, and again, I don't want to say that this is a recommendation, it's just a placeholder in this for discussion, but at that number, I think Lake County had grants of up to 30,000 was their limit. So a $30,000 grant, I believe, gives 333 grants. If it was a $15,000 limit, that's 600, that's twice that many. So those are all parameters that as you go through this handout that talks about what the criteria would be and what parameters we put in place, the number of businesses that would be available or that are out there is something that we would want to have some sense of as we go through that discussion. Mr. Surges?
To that, how did those other counties, how did our neighbors handle this?
Well, I know that as it relates to the amount, I don't want to say they did it arbitrarily. I know as it relates to numbers, for example, when we looked at some of the other breakdowns, like the forest preserves and park districts, DuPage County set aside $1 million for that. I'm not sure what the number was for business grants in the other counties. Mr. Berger, Mr. McMahon, do you have that number?
But did they take it from the 45 or the 55?
Okay, there's two questions. How did they determine the amount in the first place? And did they take it, did both parties' share get reduced by it, or was it just the municipal share?
So I don't know the answer to the second question, which kind of bucket did they take it from? Lake County developed a small business grant program, and they allocated $10 million to their small business grant program.
Off the top.
I don't know the answer to that. I have the program, and I'll share that with you electronically if you'd like to see it. But I haven't gone through it in that great a detail to know whether it came off of their 122 or whether it came off of some other. 122 was what Lake County received based on their population.
Okay, got it. Thank you, Joe.
All right, Ms. Thomas?
Just to clarify, did we agree that the development committee would be kind of the first line for discussion with respect to the nonprofits and the businesses?
No, we agreed that the development committee was the first line for discussion about the allocation of the unincorporated areas funds.
Okay.
And so we haven't just got that far, but
Okay.
so I guess here's what I'm looking for here. And this is really, we want to make these decisions as quickly as we can. Mr. Surges raised a point indicating that some municipalities in his district may not have enough requests to cover their entire amount. We've got an application that's going to go out and that's going to come back with requests. But what I wanted to do is present this today, not necessarily for the purpose of making final decisions, because this, quite frankly, the detail on this didn't get discussed at least until Saturday. So, but as you dive deeper in it, these are just decisions we have to make. And so what I'd like to do is just throw these topics out there. The questions are we going to allocate money to a business grant program? Are we going to allocate money to a not-for-profit pool? If so, how much? Okay, and if we're going to do that, what share does it come out of? Those are all policy decisions that this committee needs to make. We did task the state's attorney's office to set up a program or to research what the program guidelines would be for a business grant program. So that we haven't stalled that process. That's underway and they're working on that. And so we just need to fill in the blanks on that. The good news about a business grant program is that can be turned around pretty quickly. You know, the business, we can make it open to the public. We can have the criteria set up, and then turnaround time on that is, it may even be quicker than the turnaround time for the municipal programs. But so, and the issue is it appropriate to set aside money as a contingency for part of this program and for part of this process? So what I wanted to do is get this in everyone's hands today. We can also, I will direct that, I didn't see the final draft of this because it didn't get put together to the last minute because we were continuing to work on it. I want to send this out to the entire board because the entire board's input on this is relevant. And we can get that together, and then next week we can come back and with the hope that we'll work through this to come up with some finite recommendations that we can send on. Mr. Sanchez?
Thank you, Mr. Hosha. I just wanted to say that I'm in favor of the small business and the nonprofit grants, and I also think it should come from the external 45%, just because we have a lot on our plate with our internal requests. And if we go by a per capita number of about $55, which is pretty consistent with what the federal government used, that's still about $31 million that goes to all the municipalities, and it's still a fair number. And that gives us roughly $10 to $12 million left in that 45% to play with and figure out where we're going to put it. So I'm in favor of that.
Right, but that'll be the policy decision we'll discuss and debate next week. But that's your input now. If you're ready to give it, is fine. Mr. Martin?
Am I correct or incorrect in my recollection that when we look at the numbers presented by the municipalities and we look at the numbers presented by the county, that our out-of-pocket expenses related to the COVID virus exceed the amount of money that we've been granted? Am I correct in that?
That assumes all those numbers that were discussed were COVID appropriate.
Okay, I mean, at the risk of being a lone wolf, and I understand the timing issue, but if we establish a fund for small business before we know how much money we have, one way or the other, it's going to come from the county or the
That's correct, and I think
the cities, and so we're making a decision to establish a fund in advance of having the numbers to know how much we really have. I understand the need to move with dispatch. I'm concerned about.
And it's just a policy decision. So you may be saying that it's more important for me to fund the county and the municipalities before we do any business grants. Another board member may say, if we're going to do business grants, we need to do them immediately because the businesses need them now. And that's a priority over funding the other requirements.
I'm not.
Yeah, so that's the.
No,
that's
I
the
understand.
debate.
This is just my opinion. I just want to make sure that as people decide on the options, that to use Doug's term about it being a zero-sum game, you know, if there are realistic numbers presented by the municipalities and the county that will exhaust the $92 million before we get to the 92, then everybody has to understand that then we're shorting
right
the municipalities and the county. one way or the other on meeting fundamental expenses.
I agree with you, but I'll just give you my personal opinion on that. I personally, I don't think that the federal government expected to provide presence to the municipal governments. I think if we go through this diligently and evaluate the actual numbers that are COVID-related, we'll find that there is plenty of money left for business grants.
I would hope for the same thing.
Right.
I'm just saying that I'd like to have real numbers that we have decided that we are accepting as our basis for moving ahead.
Right. Barb?
Oh, thank you, John. You know, I think about sending applications to all the business owners, and I starting to think about the really small business owners. Like, are we then going to do bilingual? Or are the guy or the young couple running a Chinese restaurant, that the application might be confusing to them? Will we have like a help number, maybe our staff member who's going to help just specifically with COVID? But we run into those little idiosyncrasies, and I think Drew had, he said a lot of people, if it's too hard to fill out, they'll just put it aside. And
Right. I would say we're inclined to do a program will be as accommodating as possible to get it out, but that would be something we could discuss as we set the final parameters for the program.
Yeah, I mean, now that we're taking it over and not the municipalities.
The other thing is, I don't think we want to, I guess in fairness, the sooner we decide which way we're going, the better, because we got to get the money out and it's got to be used for the appropriate purposes within the time frame. All right, so with Mr. Hanson.
I'll be on the record again. It is appropriate to set money aside now as we vet the internal request and consider our municipal partners for the allocation of this money. I've said it before, I'll say it again. A healthy business in Sugar Grove means just as much to the treasurer's office and our tax rolls as a healthy business in Aurora or in Algonquin or anywhere else. And it's not only for the tax roll, it's for employment too. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. I believe that money should come out of the county share, not only for any sort of business aid, whether it be small or how you define small or regular business, as well as the non-for-profit. The non-for-profit piece should come from the county share. People that have hunger and security issues, people that have homeless, or I should say shelter issues, they don't know boundaries. And that's a regional problem, that's a countywide problem, and I believe that we can share our countywide piece for those causes.
All right, so we can anticipate what the debate will be. Ms. Thomas?
I was just going to say that I agree with Mr. Hanson, and in keeping with some of what we've already accomplished today, I am fully in agreement with us making some decision. I mean, even if it's just kind of a minimum amount that we set aside for businesses. I mean, rather than 5 million in contingency, can we say 5 million for businesses minimum?
I just think in fairness to because this is not just this committee, it's the full board, and I'm not one that wants to spring something on. This is a different way of looking, a more thorough way of looking at us moving forward. If we could digest this for a few days and then come back with some solid recommendations next week, I think we'll be better off.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Okay, thank you, Mr. O'Shea. As you go about constructing the small business grant program, if that's the intention of the board, the choke point as far as work goes will not be in sending out the applications. That is, as been said here, that's an easy thing. You just send out some paper. It's when it comes back. There's a county in Ohio where Akron is. I think it's Kent County, Ohio. They put together their program. They had a scoring points, that kind of thing. And they got 3,000 applications back. Now, they went through and processed them, and there were like 1,900 successful. But think about what's involved in 3,000 applications coming back. So I heard in this discussion about the small business grant, easy to get it going. It'll be quick. That's right. But it's when it comes back in that we now have an obligation.
Fair enough, and a good comment. And I also would suggest that you may have, when you saw the number above where we had 600,000 for administration costs. Some of that would be allocated to doing that work because it's not going to be one person at a desk with a stack of 3,000 applications being able to accomplish that. Mr. Hanson.
One other small comment. I agree with the contingency, or whatever you call it, holdback, and I believe that the administrative costs could be held in, within that too. Whatever administration costs we have for any program should be built into our contingencies. If that's 5% or 5 million, whatever we're gonna call it, you can build that into there.
All right, well, I appreciate the help of the state's attorney and Mr. Berger in putting this format together. This is homework to work on. If it's okay with the committee, we'll come back at our next meeting, get into more details on that. All right, the final item that I'd like to discuss today that we considered was the county requests. We agreed to spend time on the county detailed list of items. We all have that. Mr. Onzik provided that on Friday or Thursday. I forgot what day it was, but thank you, Mr. Onzik, for putting this together. The committee indicated a desire to go through these items. I would just say that one thing, again, to follow the task force recommendation is, as we have requests presented to us, ultimately, these need to be vetted to determine whether they're COVID program compliant in terms of qualification. I don't think we're prepared to do that today, but that's whatever we send forward in terms of recommendations. This would be subject to being reviewed, just like the other requests will be in terms of whether they meet the criteria. What's the pleasure of the committee? We have a list of items here today. We've got requests that total $37 million. Under either scenario, the funds that are going to be allocated to the county are substantially equal to or slightly greater than those numbers. Do we want to go through line item by line item, or how is it that the committee would
John, I'm sorry, was
suggest we do
that
this?
a separate handout or just electronic?
This came as an attachment to Mr. Onzik's email.
I did not print that. Yeah.
All right.
Sorry.
Do we want to take a 5-minute break so we can make some copies and then go through this? Is that the pleasure of the committee? All right, let's do that so we can hand these out then.
I could send it to the printer real quick.
All right, our 3-minute break. Roger, can you print more of these, please?
Got it, never mind.
Yes. Yeah, if you don't mind. Yes, please. No, I don't. I just got that. Sorry, I wasn't thinking. Ooh.
And all the internal,
Is it a flat roof building? Yeah, okay.
it's gonna be completely weatherproof in September, which most people are ecstatic if they can do that by November. So that means all the trades will be doing the finished work in the next few days.
Is it a mess out there or not?
It's beautiful.
They don't have to work around anything, really, do they?
No, there's tons of room. They have all the gravel in the parking lot now.
So the site setup is pretty,
They said they couldn't be going much better.
okay,
Couldn't be going any better, really.
really, good. Yeah, the weather's actually been, other than it's hot for the workers, it's been fairly dry, right?
Like this year, we had that record May for the third time in a row. But it was all concentrated on one storm. And because we had to do all that soil remediation, that makes it kind of weatherproof. You mix lime with the soil.
Oh, okay,
So the place just dried out like immediately, so it wasn't a factor at all.
nice.
It's going great.
I should know this. Do we have to expand roads to get to it or not? So it's just off an existing road, loop roof?
It's actually just off the internal road.
Right, yeah.
We have a temporary access on the front there.
Oh, really? Okay. That's got a long road.
Yeah, it's hundreds of feet long.
Yeah.
The sheriff is paying for it's called a magazine where they can store explosives all on their dime. But we were able to actually take that temporary road gravel and repurpose it to make the road to his place.
Oh, so he could use that, save some money, yeah.
Otherwise, they'd have to dispose of it.
Good timing.
It's going great. Yeah, I'm really happy. I've never worked with ours. Really happy.
Doing a good job.
That's where we got ours, and there's I forget the name, there's another one right by. They don't do a lot of government work.
Well, about, yeah. Sorry. I was kidding when I said that.
I just want to make sure my
All right, is everyone, wait till Mr. Frost comes back. All right, we have a number of requests here before us. There's 81 in total. I think everyone's had an opportunity to review these in anticipation of the meeting. And is Ms. Thomas here? I know that. I know, and you never stop, but yeah. That's it. All right. While we're waiting for Ms. Thomas, does everyone have the handouts with the detail of the requests?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
Doug Shufflo. Did this go out to the county board?
You did, Doug. It was in Mr. Onzic's email from Friday.
I'm trying to find that. Thank you.
Yeah, the attachment is these are all capital items. Can I start by just asking Mr., well, committee is all back here, so we'll move forward. Mr. Onzic, just from a big picture perspective, these are commodities, contractual services, capital, and the total is 37 million.
Yes, that's correct.
Is there a wage request as well? Is that separate from this? Yes.
There are wage requests as well. I mean, the total wages and
But they're included in this number.
in what number?
All right, so I'm looking at pages 1 through 10 of a form that's identified as non-payroll funding request detail
Okay.
report.
So that is non-payroll.
Pardon?
That is non-payroll.
And then how much is the payroll?
Well,
That's the separate spreadsheet, which is
the,
this
if-
sheet, right? Okay,
right.
so,
the 37 million correlates to that middle column that says non-payroll.
all right, so that's 37, it says 38 if I look at this.
Right, because there is also, I mean, what you're looking at in the 10-page printout are new requests that have not yet been paid for as of when we put this together. So that second column of numbers on the left side, that 1,079,000, those are expenses that we've already incurred and paid for. They're not listed on the 10-page report, but they also would need to be funded as well. The 10-page report is only then that middle column of items that has not been paid for yet. Some of it has been ordered and is in process, but it's just not been paid for yet.
All right, so you've got the 63 million in the total in the right-hand corner of your
Yes.
report. That's everything from the county side?
Everything, payroll and non-payroll.
Right. So I guess what I want to do first, from this committee's perspective, is point out that we've got 63 million in requests, and under either scenario that we talked about previously, the county share would either be $48 million or $40 million. And so we've got significantly greater requests than we have in available funds for that. Now, that's an issue that we have to deal with, recognizing that I can tell you, we don't have $48 million in incremental expenses that have been COVID-related, in my opinion. So what we need to do is go through this. Mr. Onzic's got payroll-related expenses on one breakdown, and then we have what are capital and commodity expenses. And so what we need to do is pare that list down to fit within our available resources. And I guess one thing we could do is go through the payroll. Why don't, the payroll expenses are expenses that the various office holders and department heads have indicated are incremental COVID expenses. Mr. Onzik, is that accurate?
No, they're not incremental. There may be some overtime hours that's incremental, but it's overall not incremental.
Do you have a breakdown between what's incremental and what's not incremental?
No, I do not have that. These are eligible expenses is what I provided.
They're eligible even though they may not be incremental, is what
Exactly,
you're
right.
saying.
Mhm.
All right, so that's a policy discussion that we have to have, is whether, as we go through this, do we have funds in our budget to pay certain payroll items. And the request here is for reimbursement of some of those items that may have already been in our budget, but are under the parameters that the staff and the elected officials feel would be permissible, even though they're in our current budget, is what you're saying.
Yes.
All right. Is there a way, you don't have that breakdown in terms of what's incremental and what's not?
Not with me, not.
How
here.
difficult would it be to get that?
If we're talking about overtime hours, it shouldn't be too difficult because I have all the data.
I could say, but it may be overtime. It could be new positions that were hired to do a COVID-related function as well. So it wouldn't necessarily be limited to overtime.
Well, I'm not aware of new people that were hired yet
Okay.
for COVID. I mean, if you're talking about health department, that's a totally different thing.
Right.
And they're listed separately, right?
Okay. All right, Mr. Chairman.
I follow the line of your thought, but isn't the question actually eligible versus ineligible, as opposed to incremental as one category of eligible? We could break that down, but in the end, it's either eligible or redirected labor into COVID, and both of those things are eligible.
I think, yeah, but I think knowing what the incremental costs would be if we have to, if we had 100% funding, I would say it would be irrelevant. If we don't have 100% available funding, then knowing what the difference between the two may impact our decision as a committee. So that's why I think that number, that's why I asked about it anyway. Is the committee interested in knowing that? All right. In terms of cutting back from a $63 million number to a $40 million number, that's pretty substantial. And I guess there's different areas we can cut it. We can either cut it from the payroll side or from the program side. Why don't we go through this non-payroll funding request detail report and go through a list of, we've got 80 items to go through. I think we can go through them deliberately here and see if board members have any concerns. The first four relate to animal control. I would say that normally I would be in favor of incremental animal control expenses, but because every year the animal control department has always presented their situation as they're budget neutral because they're a user fee oriented place, that if we had to prioritize expenditures, my inclination wouldn't be to add additional funding to that office. It would be that they're self-funded and they should continue to be self-funded. But that's just my personal perspective. Does anyone have any objection to the animal control item requests? You can say they're nominal in terms of dollar amount, but it's, everything adds up here. Mr. Hanson?
And I know with 80 items, we can't over scrutinize every single one, but when it comes to a generator for mobile offsite exams and housing, don't we have any portable generators for the just-in-case moment, whether it be a power outage or an issue that could be used within either building management or some other department, OEM? It sounds like we're just going shopping for something that may already be in-house.
Actually, Matt, on that, they've already purchased it. It's already in their trailer.
Okay.
I had an experience this weekend, we had a dog thrown out. Have you ever tried to call animal control?
No.
No. Can't. You have to call the sheriff. Sheriff deputy came out. He took the dog to animal control. You can't call them, they don't open till 9 on Saturdays. Sheriff takes this dog to animal control. So I was, hoping somebody that they would come with their own vehicle and take it. Sheriff's response was very good and everything. But this is unusual where a dog thrown out in this fashion.
I don't want to digress to talk about dogs. Pretty soon we'll buy a Mercedes to haul the dogs because they're used to upscale treatment. But Mr. Frost?
I know what you're saying about, I know what you're saying about this being, self-funded, but, when somebody comes in with 2-digit requests, I gotta think these are pretty reasonable requests, and I think we should just honor them as being well within our budget.
All right, is that the will of the committee to move forward, Ms. Thomas?
I agree with you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, the animal control does a wonderful job. They are one of the crown jewels of the county. But they generate revenue, and, I think this is something that they can handle. And like you said, it all adds up.
Mr. Sanchez?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Jeffers, maybe you could answer this. Am I remembering this correctly, that revenues are down for animal control this year because of everything?
Yes, their primary revenue source are tags, and because of all the sheltering in place, people are not purchasing their tags and coming out, so their revenue is down.
Thank you. I'm in favor of giving animal control their request.
All right, consensus on animal control. Those in favor of funding, put your hands up, please. I'll just take those not inclined.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
Doug Shefflow. So we're looking at the non-payroll funding request.
That's correct. Items 1 through 4.
Okay, and I'm in a meeting. And but these are just additional requests. Animal control is asking for 15,000 on the other report. So
No,
I
they're
guess
looking for, well, it's of the 15,000, these items are included. Animal control is also looking for 10,000 in payroll and roughly, yes. So the 15,000 number that you look at on the projected, Mr. Onzek, includes the amounts that are on this sheet, correct?
For animal control, they've already incurred the $10,513 in that first column. So this is the additional 2,949. No, they both really should be considered for reimbursement. It's not just the new.
So
request.
2,940. So, yeah, these, in this non-payroll funding request report, all of those items in this report are also on your spreadsheet here. They're included, correct?
Yes.
So when I look at 15,421 as the animal control office's request or department's request, that includes the 4 items that are here on this list.
That's correct.
So they're included in that 15,000, Doug.
yeah, so I mean, it looks like we're looking specifically at these 4 items
Yes,
that total roughly 3,000,
yes.
but they're actually asking for What is that number?
We're
Their
not
actual-
covering, we're not going through the payroll component now. We're just going through their requests on the non-payroll items.
But their non-payroll request is 13,000,
We'll deal with that later.
non-payroll.
Yes.
So we're just looking at this 3,000 of non-payroll.
Do you have pages 1 through 10?
Yes,
We're going through that.
I know, but it seems like we're only going through 3,000 of 13,000.
You've got it, exactly.
Okay. When are we going to go through the other 10,000?
If we can ever get through
Not
this
now.
meeting,
Round
we'll do it.
Chairman, can I?
I don't
Right.
think we need anything more, Barb,
No, I
on
was
this.
going to ask you, I think we really have to look at what's allowable, and I don't think the generator would be allowable for COVID because it's not directly related to the COVID pandemic. It's a overall emergency, but I would be concerned that's something we might have to pay back.
So are you requesting as the director that we remove the generator?
Yes.
All right, the consensus of the committee was to move forward with the rest of the requests, but we'll remove the generator based on the director's request. Is that acceptable to the committee?
Mhm.
Okay, auditor's office. We've got a request for $300. Do we want to talk about that? All right, all of these are going to be subject to being vetted through the process anyway, but if the department head or elected official wants to step up now, we can take them out. We'll make that process easier. Building management items, we have 2 items from building management. One, capital expenses to bring the facilities up to a standard that protects the public and its employees. I don't know what that is. Do we have an explanation for what that 1.6 million is? Ricky?
So in terms of the overall $1.6 million, there's a number of things on here. We have, at the request of the chief judge, we have 3 locations that he's asked for additional cleaning services and disinfecting on a daily basis, 8 hours a day, for Third Street Courthouse, the Judicial Center, the Juvenile Justice System. In addition to that, the bulk of that $1.6 million is the upgrade of our HVAC system countywide, including additional upgrade filters and UV lighting on our HVAC systems. That's what the bulk of that is.
And that's for filtering to theoretically eliminate or limit virus.
Yes, the limit to
Distribution.
viruses, particles, and viruses going through our HVAC system.
Anyone question that? Mr. Sanchez?
I just have a question about, do we know how efficacious the UV filtration is in HVAC systems?
Right now, it's the leading and current technology that's out there. There's a bunch of other proposed solutions out there, but right now, that's the most scientifically sound technology out there.
And they've been tested with coronaviruses. Obviously, probably haven't had enough time for COVID-19 to be tested on these systems, but
Right.
coronaviruses in general as a category. Thank you.
Mr. Hanson?
Thank you. More of a general question. Actually, a specific one first. There were, I guess, small requests from the judiciary. Why would that be included into your department's request instead of theirs?
Right now, we're currently responsible for the sanitation of the buildings.
Okay.
So disinfecting them when we have a positive coronavirus test that goes out, we go through and disinfect the buildings.
Okay. And the bigger question is, there's other similar types of requests throughout the 10 pages, and I'm sure it'll be an ongoing request for additional rounds of cleaning or different levels of cleaning. Is there any cost savings in frankly creating a bigger ask, if you will, for all the departments or for all the different buildings with the contract for everyone to do that? Or is it going to be more of a as needed based on usage in the facility?
It's usually based on as needs. For example, this Saturday, this weekend, over at the King County Branch Court, we had to disinfect that building because personnel tested positive for Hvac. So on Saturday, we disinfected that building.
Ms. Thomas, you had a question? I'm sorry, Mr. Frost.
Yeah, this is an airborne virus. I know this is a big number, but this is exactly what I would expect to see being requested. And, you know, the UV treatment of the air through the air system is going to not only help with the virus in question, but it'll also actually help with colds and flu and other things. So there should be some ancillary benefits to this. So I support it.
Mr. Martin?
Just a practical point that will carry through on all of this. We need to know that if we say, fine, we'll do it, that the money can be spent and the project completed by December 30th.
Right. Is that?
That's the plan. We've already engaged outside firms to get started working on the design of the UV-Vac systems and things like that. So as soon as the money is allocated, they're ready to go.
And what is the, while you're at the podium, item 7 is modification for building C. What is that?
Well, building C is based on an evaluation of those facilities, is based on social distancing. In addition to that, there's a number of other things built in, for the lack of a better term, built-in string guards and counters and things like that. So there's going to be some alterations to the facility to make it compliance to social distancing.
And again, that can be completed before the end of the year.
Yes.
Mr. Hanson?
Isn't there a proposal process for, I mean, my guess is an HVAC remodel is probably a pretty big price tag. I realize this is emergency relief aid, but talking about a rework and you've already talked to outside people that are ready to go, how did that process go down? I mean, don't we have to put this out for bid?
Well, because we have a county contractor, engineering and architect firm already contracted, we've already engaged those guys to move forward because they've already been vetted and awarded the contract. They can move forward without going through the bid process.
All right, with that information, is everyone okay with 6 and 7?
No.
All right. Which one are you objecting to?
Number 6.
Okay.
I just don't believe that the data is there for the blue light.
Chairman, I also have a question.
I have been to several doctors' offices and medical facilities that use this and swear by it. It's one of those 6 of one, half dozen of the other, that for every one that I says it's an absolute must and essential, I can show you somebody who says absolutely not. And I just don't have the data. I've equally gone on demonstrations for a portable UV light and how well they work. And I think the testing for that portable light is there because of the amount of power that can generate in a specific area. I've seen them portable enough to walk through the hospital and hit the doorknobs and hit everything that needed to be. I'm just not a believer that the HVAC system technology is actually there yet.
Okay.
That's just a personal thing for me.
All right, Ms. Barrero?
Thank you, Chairman Hoshite. I would also like the committee to think about the HVAC upgrades, because I know from serving on the Judicial Committee for several years that there has always been issues with the HVAC over at the Judicial Center. And I would hate to have us get caught in trying to upgrade the system so it finally works properly for the whole building and calling it a COVID expense.
All right, understood. Will we move on to the circuit clerk's request, or are there any other questions? Ms. Thomas?
Thank you. I have a question about items, number 7. Who is in building C? Is that just building management staff, or are there other departments in building C?
In building C, I believe there's assessors, the department,
recorder,
the recorder, and CAAC, I believe.
Okay.
And GIS.
And GIS.
Thank you, Roger.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify because there are a lot of upcoming.
Right. All right,
expenses about telework. Thank you.
we have 3 requests from the Circuit Clerk's office. First 2 are for sanitizing and cleaning. The last item is paper stock because of rescheduling notices. I know they did for every case they had to send out special notices, so that is clearly incremental COVID. Any questions on 8 through 10? Hearing none, County Clerk has a request for, I'm sorry, number 11, the coroner's capital expense, $500,000. Do we have an explanation as to what this is for, other than what's in the sheet here? Equipment needed to keep employees and public safe. I don't know. Mr. Martin, as chairman of the committee, do you have any insight? Oh, okay.
Microphone.
Oh, that's right. Mr. Leonard is now. Yeah.
Sorry. I recall as part of his presentation that he had motor vehicles. He described them as empty ambulances and some other things. And my personal thought would be that we've got to know a lot more about the 500,000 before we can move ahead with it.
All right. Is the committee in a position to recommend this at this point? All right.
No.
All right, but we need more information. Right. All right, so we'll move on to the county clerk. This is contractual services. County clerk's office, is there someone here from the county clerk? Mr. Pollack, I know you, I appreciate your getting back to me. It's difficult to estimate what's needed for, is this election-related expenses that you're outlining here, the 1.7 million?
Thank you. It's pretty much the presentation that we gave you. I think our CPA put it into a little bit of a narrative versus the presentation, but it's the things we looked at and we talked about for election day.
And I think there was consensus that that was something that that was necessary. The only caveat I would put on that is to the extent there's funding, additional funding provided from other sources because of election-related expenses, that we would use that theoretically as an offset to these numbers. But does anyone have any question on that? I appreciate your fine-tuning this, and we realize that this is somewhat of a moving target. Mr. Hanson?
Just for clarity, so these would be costs associated above and beyond what you already had budgeted for the election cycle?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
We have Development Department has 2 requests. One is for office reconfiguration, and this is related to, I guess, similar to the social distancing request that was previously made. And then the next one, a data-driven requests for return to work or school safely. How about item 13? Anyone object to that? Item 14?
Yes.
Okay. Is it, what is the?
Okay, may I try to speak to that?
Yes.
Okay, this is at some point, if we're going to go about the process, this is the Qualtrics. If we're going to go about the process of bringing everything together and getting feedback as far as the response from our constituents on how this effort is addressing their needs, this would be the method, one of the methods of doing it that's being done in other places successfully across the country. And one of the most important things to revitalize the economy is to match people who are out of jobs with employers who are following public health guidelines matching those up to get people back to work so that they can make their mortgage payment, property taxes, pay their income and sales taxes when they shop. So this is a COVID-related, so it's not disqualified from that, but it's a question of whether the board will want to explore actually getting feedback from, in a mechanical way.
This is an all or nothing proposition if we do it. It's not like if we had to cut it back.
It can be dialed back, but this is the recommended approach.
All right.
May be necessary, according to this board, might not be.
If we were going to be fair, we'd devote one meeting to just talking about these. And the department heads or somebody would be here to answer our questions, because we're just guessing right now.
But I
Our
think,
memory doesn't go back that far to understand what.
well, we had presentations made, as you recall, from elected officials and department heads as it relates to major capital expenditures that they were requesting in
remember
the
that, but-
past. Now, this is a larger list that we're receiving, and I guess the question is, based on the information that we have here, a basic understanding of the concept, is this something that we would make as a priority, or is it something that we would want to defer in deference to the other requests? Mr. Sanchez?
I'm in favor of going through this list today, but it is obvious some things we do have questions on. So maybe if there's things we want more information, then we can defer that to next week to have
right.
answered and then continue
You
with the
call that a
rest.
compromise?
Mr. O'Shea.
We're doing both.
This form that you're seeing, the structure of this, is a part of what was a larger request in the form. So there's, in addition to the columns on here, there was another part that says detailed description, which was cut from this version of it that you're seeing. So there's more detail to each one of these that might help explain, on paper what you're looking at. In fact, each particular item in this has a detailed project sheet. So you can see it like a one-pager on each one of these 80 items, and it has more details. So just so you know that that is out there if we wanted to.
Well, it'd be nice to have it if we're going to.
We can generate that and send it out, which
Please.
would be like a cut sheet on each one.
So does the committee want to have that before we go any further? Or do you want to continue through this process?
We'll just.
I'm not willing to slow this baby down, so let's keep moving.
All right, so we're going to put that for further consideration.
But number 13, can we all agree on
13 is okay, yes. All right. Consensus. 14, we need more information. Environmental and water resources. This is a waste hauler recycling any question on this one? No, hearing none. Under finance, we have two requests. This is social distancing related and outside auditor controls for coronavirus relief fund, both directly related. I would say item 17 may be subject to being reimbursed from our administration costs of the program, but any objections on those two items?
I agree with you there. That could very easily be built into our admin and contingency.
Okay, but we can move that through. All right, now the health department, we've got two significant items here. Did we already deal with item 19? All right, so 19 is moot. Item 18 is the purchasing of supplies, mitigation supplies, PPE equipment, sheltering. So all of these clearly are eligible and are directly related. It's a big number, though. Does anyone have a question on this item? Mr. Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question just regarding the overall PPE for the county, for all the different departments that need PPE. Is that going through the health department, or is the health department covering the health department? All other departments cover themselves for PPE?
So it's been very fragmented. We started out simply because we couldn't get the supplies and we didn't have the funding at first. It would be best if it was a consensus. We became the holder of it. We have coordination. versus every department trying to purchase their own. Because we work closely with the sheriff because they were getting supplies from FEMA. And so we are required by IDPH because they're anticipating a surge. So there's 2 parallel tracks here. Over 2 million is for our 30-day. So they're anticipating a surge, and you know, we get a surge. We're supplying the whole county, outside and inside. So that's primarily. So then we're buying supplies that they call it the burn rate, that they're using regularly. We're still using it regularly, but not at the rate if we had a surge. But I would prefer if we bought it for everyone in the county. That would be my preference.
Mr. Frost?
I'm sorry. I would just say that, you know, if there's one thing we should have, it's this request. You know, it'd be pretty embarrassing having to distribute all these funds and then to come up short. So I would support it.
Any objections to 19 or 18? Mr.
I'll try this a different way. I don't want her to get
I thought you were going to say you didn't believe in COVID, so you didn't want masks.
trying to reverse psychology to see if
Mr. Hanson?
Just for clarity, thank you for sending the breakdown of the 30-day. So
that's from overuse.
Yeah. There you go. Measure once and cut once. So the 30-day buildup that's a requirement as a result of the pandemic. And the spreadsheet you send indicates a cost of $2.3 million to build up the 30-day supply. Within that, I see there's a line for both first responders and for the county employees, including the election judges. For the election judge part, and what's provided for the responders, is that your in-house providing of everything, or is that part, just so I get my head around it, is that to be distributed on a daily basis, or is that truly just your set aside for the just-in-case moment?
So our first responders and our courts, we are very supportive of giving them they don't have time to try to figure out, you know, where they want their burn rate is. And so as the courts, remember, everybody went sheltering in place. So as the courts begin to open, their burn rate is greater, right? Because you got more people coming in. So the rate of the burn rate is increased every time you have more people. So the daycare shut down. Now it's going to be open. So we do continuously supply the courts and others in the department PPEs for their regular use, which is separate and apart from the 30-day that we have to put in a stockpile.
All right, so are we good? Consensus is that number 18 is acceptable.
Okay.
All right, number 19, or number 20. The first is IT has a number of requests, and I think we could take them in groups. First is workspace, dividers, barriers, social distancing. I think consensus has been that we tend to favor those requests. The next several items, 21 through at least 26, and even 27, up through 27, seem to be projects that are related to remote working primarily. Roger?
Yes.
All substantial cost projects. I have just one philosophical question. If we make the investment to do this and COVID goes away, do these expenses have any long-term value?
Yes, they're capital assets. They'll be part of the property.
Would they eventually result in us reducing our need for offices?
I think that look at it from telework and what people are asking the county to do. These were the items that were specific to that request, and those offices that are at the Judicial Center, and it goes through items 29, 30, 31. So all of them up through 31 are all related to telework, and I tried to organize those that way. What people are asking for us to do is to essentially have up to 2,000 people working almost anywhere at any time. Honestly, I think that this is the ability to do that and to do it in a way in which it can be reliable. So right now, there are many things that we do that work. I would not describe them as reliable ways to telework. And I think that all of these are related to making reliable telework scenarios for critical infrastructure that runs the courts, that runs the government center campus here, that runs the transportation department, the health department, juvenile center. We do have animal control on here as well. So looking at how most of these telework scenarios or remote working scenarios are coming together, they're coming together on the original ingenuity of what we own now, but they're exposing us to 6 months of if this doesn't work. And I will use for an example something as simple as a county board committee meeting when you have a sound issue. And we have one way of running these meetings right now. We don't even have a backup room for running this type of a meeting. So imagine you're running 35 courts and you have a network issue, or you're running transportation, or you're running the health department, and everything is telework. You're saying you're doing it all electronically, digitally, and remotely, and it doesn't work. And there's something that you need to address or fix. Can you afford to have that type of a delay or deferment? We're not saying it doesn't work as it sits right now, but it's very akin to having a single point of failure, having lack of business continuity for operations that you have deemed critical to your COVID relief and COVID response. And that's for public safety, for the health department, and the offices and departments in general. So again, the things that we do are not specific to IT, I think, except for the furniture. That was something that the health department walked through and said, for the 40-some employees, we need to have
Right, we're good with that.
others, cubicles. But the other fiber and infrastructure, specifically telework and that continuity of operations.
Right, anyone have any concern regarding this?
The one I would take off is the 32 and put that.
We're not on 32 yet.
Oh.
We're on
But
31.
that's, they're all necessary, but how necessary?
Okay, up through 31, any questions? Ms. Thomas?
I have a question about 22. I'm just wondering if this equipment is kind of back office, if you will, or are we talking about staff people who still don't have what they need every day?
This request was specific to the court clerk. They moved the court clerk's request under IT, and some of these are requests that were pushed over to IT because they felt they were more infrastructure technology related. So the court clerk was looking at their entire staff's ability to telework. There were some other folks in the courts that were asking the same question. I think we had some other offices and departments that were looking to move more people to telework. And I think some of that, and I could be wrong, but that some of that was being addressed or driven by once school starts, if there's things that force them to be home, to be with children that are going to school, or other things related to the continuation of this, that they would need more people to continue to telework and even expand upon it. Not that people are going to be physically coming back. They would increase the amount of telework that they're doing. So, but it's laptops, it's computers, it's equipment for them to be able to do the telework.
Mr. Hanson, your hand up next.
Just one other follow-up. So I guess the question is, what have people been doing then? Because we're just now really coming back. And so if people don't have what they need now, it's,
I think,
or is this an example of we're making what we have work? They're just older machines. Is that what we're saying?
it's absolutely making what we have work for now. And I do believe a lot of these people have been coming in to work in spite of the conditions or in spite of the concerns. And they're looking and working with both their union collective bargaining agreement, trying to figure out scheduling, trying to figure out how to make this work. And that was their request. And I don't want to put words in their mouth, but the courts and the folks at the court clerk asked for these types of telework capabilities.
Mr. Martin?
Do we know that this type of capital expenditure is,
This is all subject to being vetted.
all
Okay,
right,
yes.
that's, okay, that's one point. The second thing is, you know, I stopped at the 7-Eleven today to buy a Snickers, and of course, it's all plexiglass all over the front. And every store is the same way. And I'm going to guess the day that a vaccine comes out, that plexiglass is going to disappear and the spots on the floor that tell me where to stand are going to disappear. Are we making alterations of construction quality to these buildings and these plans that in a year we might be taking out and have the same budget in reverse to revert our offices to?
No, we'll have a new recycling program for the plexiglass.
Well, I know that. Well, I mean, my point is, it is one thing to figure out how to get through 2 years. It's another thing to say, I'm gonna make a construction grade change in offices or procedures that might unravel and, you know, on vaccine day. And it's a comment of probably no worth, but when I look at these expenses, to me, it's
This
significant.
is, I think in 22 through 31 at least, those are like technology infrastructure changes to improve the system, to have backups in case one system went down, that kind of thing, Roger, right?
The capacity also would be increased because right now you're dealing obviously with one connection that you could have two that would provide additional capacity for more data, more resources to go through, more computers and network. So there's a couple of additional ones past number 32 that I just realized as well, but.
All right, well, we can touch those and we get the
Okay.
same deal. Does anyone have any express objection to this concept?
Other than 24, I don't see the ones that we're discussing right now as being a priority.
You don't see them as a priority?
No.
All right.
I didn't hear a peep about these when we were putting together a capital bill last year.
All right, that's one dissenting vote on the committee. How about the rest of the committee? He said other than 24.
And I'll be honest, I don't understand all the fiber optic stuff. That's possibly a bit over my head without somebody explaining it to me. And I don't want to seem naive,
So,
but
if
I don't
if I
necessarily
can,
get it.
to address Mr. Hansen's statement, the items that are related to fiber optic and telework were not in a capital budget last year because we weren't doing telework last year. We didn't have hundreds of people trying to do telework. So we did not plan for this. I will give you that. And I think that's why you didn't see it in our capital budget.
And I'm sorry, what I meant to say was when we're making a request to Springfield for capital needs, if these are deemed to be backups, those have been viable asks of Springfield last year. That's what I meant. And I didn't mean your budget request for our budget within the county. I meant for the request of Springfield.
Okay.
And if I can further, Roger, part of my, and I'm going to make a statement that's going to come out wrong, and I just don't know how to formulate the question. But we've had members and we've had conversations over the past 2 years that areas like West Dundee have been trying to attach to the existing fiber optic network that's already laying right there. But the cost for them to do that it's not there. Money's not there to make the connection. And then what we're asking here is, well, can we just have more money to lay more cable out there or optic line or whatever that we already have people that can't afford to hook up to it to make it work, but we just want to do some more.
This
I'm
is for
struggling-
internal county.
This is our building.
I'm struggling with this.
All right.
So the buildings that are in those items that you're seeing have one connection that is basically providing the services to that building. These are simply our own buildings getting diverse connections so that we have more than one way to operate this, and we get the increased capacity into those buildings. It does not address any other village or town connecting to this infrastructure for their purposes. The infrastructure that we do have many institutions and agencies that connect to it. There is a cost for them to make that initial connection. And I think that that's usually been the prohibitive factor, is they don't want to make the investment because they don't have the size or that necessitates that type of connectivity. We do. We have hundreds of people that are working on something in different buildings in 7 cities. You know, we have 35 buildings throughout the county. And we don't need to revisit all the reasons why it was good to have a private network. But the idea was that leasing these services from a public provider, or, you know, a large telecom company would be cost prohibitive, and we could own it within about 4 years
So
and
one
not be
of
paying
the other
recurring.
line items was, we'll bring the fiber optic to a disenfranchised neighborhood,
That's
32.
32.
which we're not on that page yet.
Right.
So I'm just trying to reconcile everything called optics, fiber optics,
Sure.
and I'm not sure I have the bandwidth to understand.
Up to 31 is beefing up our system.
Got it. Thank you.
All right. Okay, Mr. Sanchez.
I talked to Roger about this the other day. He went in pretty good detail, showing the lines and how we do have a lot of, not weaknesses, but potential weaknesses in what this, and the way I understand it, what this is doing is helping support us fulfill our mandated functions. So this isn't even a wish list. It's kind of like, well, if we're going to do this, providing all these services, we do need this backup just in case. If one line goes out, our courts might be gone or might be out, things like that. So that's the way I understand it.
All right, so Mr. Hanson objects. Is there anyone else on the committee that objects to the concept of moving these forward? Hearing none. Item 32, Mr. Kenyon, this is extending fiber optics to parts unknown.
I would just put that last on my wish list and do the important things first. And maybe there's another source of funding. We should look for that.
All right.
And the return is not going to be that great.
This is a large number item, Mr. Sanchez.
I have concerns. It's a big price tag, but also the amount of time it will take to put into place and what it will be serving. It doesn't seem like it's really going to be serving residents. We'll put fiber optic out west more. Governments and school districts will have access to it. Companies will have access to it to sell to residents. So where I'm coming from, it just seems like a very large price tag that we might not even be able to put in place in time.
Ms. Thomas?
I concur with Mr. Sanchez. I think we should take this off the table.
Mr. Hanson? Mr. Chairman?
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First of all, it can be put in place in time. That's a question that's been asked, and Roger's answered it. This is a piece that addresses what I read in the paper all the time about, and I think it's valid, that there are low income and underserved areas. I'm told, I read that Hispanic population and African American population are more susceptible because they must go into work. And rather than going into, rather than having the capacity to telework or telemedicine or learning from home, there are all of the digital divide. And if we're going to do anything about that, and maybe this board doesn't feel that that's a priority, to have any kind of areas that are not served with high capacity fiber optics, that the lower income communities, underserved, possible that we should also, when we get the expert in place, search the 16 other grant programs, but gosh, I think we were all reading the same newspapers about what populations are hit the hardest. And if we're going to have telework and telemedicine and learning, distance learning, have to have the capacity.
All right, we've got committee input. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your input. Is the will of the committee to move forward with this or to remove it? I believe we've got, on this side, it's 4 against.
I have one more question.
All right,
if
Mr.
I may.
Sanchez, sure.
And if I can address to you, Mr. Chairman, I am all in favor of getting better internet access to low-income communities, underserved communities, if that's the term we're going to use. How does that play out with this plan? Because my understanding from the meeting in which we discussed this, we were going to be putting fiber optics out west because we already have it here on the east side where the majority of low-income residents are. And once those fiber optic networks are put into place, it's not like we're going to be handing them a passcode where they can access our fiber optic network. It has to go through another company that will then sell them that access, in which case that still doesn't solve the problem of being low income.
Perfect. That's absolutely right. If we don't have the skeletal structure in place out to all areas, we're disadvantaging some places. So there are 2 components. One is the capital component. Due to how our lives have changed because of COVID, so you have to have the capital side. And what Mr. Kenyon said about getting the operating kind of subsidy for people to actually be able to use it. I've heard proposal, I think the governor just announced a $108.5 million grant that's supposed to go for education, both pre-K through 12 on digital divide. And I believe that someplace out there, when we get folks who are a lot better at trying to find where this money is, because there sure is enough of it, the second component is the operating side of being able to use the capital assets that's there. So I see it as backbone goes out, connection will need to be subsidized probably through a 3-year contract so people can use it. So people can afford. People who can't write out a $60 to $80 check per month. Exactly as you say.
All right, can I show of hands from the committee? Who would be in favor of moving this forward?
I would suggest just in study mode.
Those opposed? All right, the consensus is to remove this item, so we will do so. Information technology, we've got another whole page here, Roger. Items 33 through 39. You indicated some of these were consistent with the network upgrades for distance working. Can you identify which ones those are?
Sure. The item 33 is VPN licensing. That basically would be for full-featured VPN licensing for the entire county. Right now, we're using basically like what would be considered an express version. In other words, it has limited features, but it'll allow you to get onto a computer. Probably the primary reason for that is when people are doing their full job, they want multiple displays and they want other devices connected. So in order to do that, you have to buy the full-featured VPN license for the entire computing population. Second, the next item, number 34, we'll skip over because that's a different project. 35 was
more social distancing.
More social distancing. I believe that one is already incorporated in the $250,000 that was for Building C.
All right, so we can take that out?
Yes.
So 35 is deleted.
Then there's another equipment. This one is court clerk. The other one was offices and departments. So this one is the court clerk at 95,000. The other one was other offices and departments.
Okay.
And then, sorry about that. We also, item 37, we put in a line item for PPE. This is based on each employee working in office or in offices. I think it was based on an average of $3 per day for the remainder of the year.
Is that in addition to what the health department's
It,
requiring?
it is. So if the health department's covering it, we're fine with that.
We can take that out?
Yep.
All right.
The number 38 is INOC Network Monitoring Services. This is absolutely critical to us. Right now, we're monitoring 35 buildings on network routing and switching and power, 24 hours a day. When anything goes wrong, we're on call, and this would actually take that off of our employees. We're willing to consider or reconsider that at the end of the year, but right now, we are burning people out. That's the only way to describe it. And this would take over monitoring for us in the basically 24 hours a day. They'll watch our network and provide first level service for the routed network between buildings.
Okay.
The item 39 was something that was asked by the tax administration group, specifically Mark Armstrong. And this was for all of our citizens to have basically a contact list, property administration and tax administration. So they don't have seniors and people coming in to fill out various forms and having them have to travel to the second floor of the narrow hallway in Building C or other narrow entryways where we have lots of people congregating for property tax.
All right. Can you cover item 34 as well?
34. Okay, so item 34 was related to the camera systems, in-building camera systems and adult corrections in the Judicial Center. The idea behind that was as people are in the building, traveling through the building, there are camera systems that will assist the limited corrections and court security staff with identifying people that are one, have high temperatures, two, not following policies about congregating in locations, literally counts how many people are in hallways or in rooms. It's artificial intelligence. It does the thermal imaging, tells you if they have a temperature, it'll tell you if they are wearing a mask, and it'll also tell you if they are congregating. So we put this in there as something that would help the public safety side of both the adult corrections and judicial center. It was something that we've been discussing with a couple of different contractors, but it is $1.2 million. And I think about 800,000 of it is related to the jail and 400,000 is related to the judicial center.
All right. Let's do it this way. Let's leave item 34 out of the discussion. With respect to 33, 36, 38, and 39, is there any committee objection to those? Ms. Thomas?
I think I need more information on 39.
Okay. So let's put 39 on a get more information list, and maybe that'll be explained in more detail when we get the backup for this. Any other concerns with those items? Hearing none. Item
Chairman
30.
Hoshite,
Yes.
this is Commissioner Weber. Roger, I have a question for Roger.
Okay.
Because
sure.
of all the teleworking, I was wondering if there's any productivity software that we could incorporate to see, moving forward, if there's a way to better allocate employees now that they are teleworking. We can learn a lot about our business. I was wondering if there's any software that we could incorporate to help out with this.
I don't know if I caught the first part of that. Did you mention a type of software, or were you just asking in general?
Asking if there was a type of software.
Yeah, I think operational efficiencies and some of the things that we had looked at, related to those efficiencies. We had done some work with doing business process review. That obviously takes human interaction or some type of coordinated meeting. But to look at how they're doing their current work, assessing that and making recommendations about telework and how they can do it better electronically. One example of that is digital signatures. We're working on that project through the courts right now and some of the other offices and departments. And the idea is people don't have to physically be coming in just to sign a piece of paper. They can sign it electronically. So that was one business process that we've already made changes to. I think the same thing would be true for tax administration. They'd like to change how their business processes work. I think Mark's very forward thinking about that right now. He sees it as something that not only we should be doing, but we absolutely need to do. And I think, not just COVID specific, but, the general technology that's available makes that possible. So it's possible to do it, and it's COVID. So.
All right. Any other questions, Mr. Rickert?
If I may speak on behalf of item number 39. Please realize that the Supervisor of Assessments deals with all our senior citizens, disabled veterans, disabled people with their exemptions. And a lot of this is to make this system a little bit easier for them. These are all high-risk groups. It's a necessary expense. It'll make the operation a little bit more efficient. I strongly encourage you to support item number 39.
Thank you. We'll look forward to the additional information, and thanks for the backup support for that, Mr. Rickert. All right, let's go to item 34. What's the will of the committee on 34?
I would love to hear some more on this. I don't know how COVID acceptable this is, but and I'm going to get some of this wrong, but I would love to correlate our work comp claims in these areas compared to having a brand new fancy camera system. But I don't know how that relates to COVID. So I just want to be honest about my bias and enthusiasm for this.
All right, so we'll put that on the more information list. All right. Item 40, judiciary commodities. This is expenses that have been incurred during the pandemic to conduct court remotely. Any concern on these? These look fairly specifically related. 41, CANCOM commodities, additional cleaning on 41. I assume there's no question with that. And 42 is cleaning as well. Any issue there? 43, law library, PPE equipment. Again, I guess the only question is does the health department have these funds in there? But we can leave that in there at the amount it is at this point. All right, it's 6 o'clock, and the next several items are sheriff related. This is a work in progress. I'll take the committee's decision as to whether they feel we've been productive and we'd like to adjourn this to our next meeting, knowing we've got committee of the whole tomorrow, which may run late, or whether you want to keep going.
I think we'd be more productive if we stopped and then restarted.
All right.
It's just.
The
like-
sheriff is left, correct?
Sheriff isn't here.
Yeah,
Why don't we do this, in deference to the other individuals that are still here? What I'd like to do is move up to item 77 and complete the list. And then at the next meeting, we can have the sheriff attend and we can address his issues. Item 77 is portable workstations for the state's attorney's office. Any question on those? 78, consulting for CARES Act distribution. This was the contractual item, Mr. McMahon, that you said you have in your budget, correct?
Correct, I do.
So do we need that to be
No,
included?
you don't. I put it in here because it's
It is
related,
related, okay.
but it's already in my budget.
All right, so item 78 can be removed. Thank you. 79, supervisor of assessments. This is for Board of Review, remote attendance to Board of Review meetings, is that?
Yes, I believe that's border review specific.
Roger, is that something that we can't accommodate with our current system?
If they're looking to set up their own border review environment, that would be the camera equipment and licensing for video conferencing. And then they are also looking at adding equipment to provide scanning while they're doing it. So I believe the scanner and all of that combined is what they're.
All right, any concern about that?
Just the question you had is, do we already have the capability of video conferencing built into some other room in here for what their needs are?
Not really what they're looking to do compared to, I mean, in order to do what they're doing now, they're doing it here because of all the different equipment, and they want a smaller subset of that for the border review hearings. There's a room in Building C that they'd like to equip for this purpose. The camera equipment and computing equipment and the displays are probably the first half of that. And then there's licensing and other things that we have to pay for the year to accommodate. And that's going to be a big question too in the future is some of the things that we're licensing to accommodate telework now, come 2021, do you want to continue licensing all of these telework licenses for, conferencing and meeting capabilities and remote work? And, if it doesn't go away and it continues, the burden of keeping that running over time every year, recurring.
So I'm not gonna hold this up. I'm in support of it, but
Yeah.
for the longer term plan, it's not out of the realm of taking on additional cost to design a room or rooms that can be multi-purpose with the design of conference room.
All right, so the consensus is 79 is okay. 80 is additional mailing to help seniors with their exemptions. I assume no one has any objection to that.
That COVID related?
Yes, because they don't have to come to the office, then that was the intention.
I'll try to ask.
Did you go in person or did you mail yours in?
I put my money in the bank.
Okay, just checking. All right, item 81.
With your indulgence, if it weren't, so number 81 is Treasury Function Best Practices, Maximizing Return on the $92.9 million. If it weren't for the COVID funding, we wouldn't have explored this. Once the committee and the board is starting to move money out the door, I believe that you're going to want to move it fast. The COVID portion, actually, Mark, can you put that up? The COVID portion pays for itself. Basically, it's liquidity analysis, speed of disbursements, best practices. It's an increase in the 92.9 million maximum interest rate. It is a NACO endorsed and recommended best practice. The target is basically moving the interest from about 49 basis points, which is good, to 100 basis points. So with the relief funds, if you take just half of it and you say we improve the interest rate by 50 basis points and you have that money for only about 3 months, estimated interest income about $62,500. Using this across what's in it for the county, in addition, is best practices applied across the county. If you cut the benefit in just the interest income in half, not 50 basis points, but 25 basis points on 250 million, not all of that is investable capital. It's 625,000. So the cost for this program for the board's consideration, 62,500, paid upfront in increased interest. And then there is, as we understand this better, know the practices better, it has additional benefit to the county. So I appreciate that Dave Rickard and Carolyn Brady, 2 CPAs, are moving this along. Gosh, when something pays for itself, because of COVID funding, and then
Theoretically could be paid from the revenue generated by the fund's investment and may qualify to be part of the administration costs of this.
Exactly. And there's a, what do you call it, opinion letter from an attorney. We'll, and the
Any
expert
questions on
will
this?
tell us.
Obviously goes through through our vetting process, but it seems to make sense to the extent it qualifies, so. All right, with that, what I'd ask staff to do is maybe if we could pare the list down for those items that have been eliminated by agreement. For those items that require, when the new list is prepared, if you can put a star by those items that require further explanation, we'll discuss those at our next meeting. And we'll have the sheriff present next meeting. And Mr. Onzik, as we wrap this up, if you could just provide that additional information on the personnel side about the COVID versus non-COVID. I mean, yes, the incremental cost. I'm not saying that non-COVID. I know there's eligible versus incremental, but I just want to, I think we need to have that because as we pare this list down by agreement, we've reduced some significantly, but we still have to fit within the available funds. And the next meeting, I'd like to propose next meeting to be Monday afternoon, same time if that's convenient for everyone. I appreciate everyone being here and the time put in. Mr. Hanson?
I'm sorry, should anything need to move forward from the next committee onto exec, does that give us time?
Right.
I know that we have the route to send it straight to the full board, I'm just asking.
Well, okay, so what we've done, that's a good point. Before we conclude our meeting, our agenda had potentially 5 resolutions, one which we've moved forward. B has been moved forward. A has been deferred until next meeting, which we would ask executive at least to have a placeholder for that so that we can move it forward. We'll have the finalized version for that. Item C, public health and safety, related public coordination proposal. I would say all of these items we could just have a placeholder on, and if we have detail, we could fill them in. Is that okay? And then do we need do these resolutions that are on the agenda encompass, if we were to do the county funding of any portion of it, does it include that, or do we need an executive to have another resolution that would include county funding?
I'd be happy to work with you on having something that we can act upon.
Act on. All right. Very good. All right.
Oh, may I?
Sure.
For whatever the next meeting, whether it's next meeting or a couple of meetings from now, one of the things that I would request that the CAAC committee analyze is because $92.9 million is very important, that was the funding that the Treasury gave Kane County based on our population. The funding that is based on Kane County population that went to Springfield on our behalf, $113.5 million. I would think that there's something that the CAAC committee can do to encourage our legislators to get our fair share back. So I know it's not if 92.9 million is important, then 113.5, which is 20% more money, that's got to be important. And so what is it that we're going to do as far as the CAAC effort to get that money? So if we can put that on, that really needs action.
All right, so just one final point before we entertain a motion to adjourn. Is 3 o'clock the best time for everyone, or would be 2 o'clock be better?
If it's going to be this long, maybe 2:30 is more appropriate.
Okay, 2:30 a compromise. Any staff have any objection to 2:30? All right.
John, if I can, I just want to take a minute and thank our professionals here. Roger, you get the brunt thrown at you. Roger, hi. You get the brunt thrown at you, and it seems today that a whole bunch of stuff has been moved into your bucket. But you are the wizard behind the curtain there, and I can't think of a time that I've ever asked you to do something that you haven't done it or pointed me in a direction with a smile on your face, and by a push of a button and a password, it's magically worked and appeared. And I know that everybody that I speak with in the county says it's your staff and not you, but that's okay. Yeah. We get it. And I just wanted to thank you for making it look easy. And I know it's not.
I think it's appropriate, though, Cliff, your point's well taken, and all the staff that are here today and those that may be on the line, staying late for our meetings. Tomorrow's another late meeting. Mr. Onzik, crunching the numbers. State's Attorney's Office working through the weekends to get everything done, and Scott here, Mr. Rickert. I'm sorry, Gabby, yes, our minutes are, we'd like to have the minutes by Tuesday if possible. No, just kidding. But no, everyone that's here, we appreciate it, and so we're not taking it for granted, and that's one of the reasons I suggested we conclude early tonight instead of going into the wee hours. So thank you, everyone. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Surgis moves, Mr. Froz seconds. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.